Morning. Good morning. Good to see people in the flesh again after we last met in 2020. So welcome this morning. First thing, have we got any apologies? I've got from Naomi Cornish and Louise Maunder and Rob Wynne.
Mark Kitchen.
Hang on, can't do with more than one at once.
Mark Kitchen.
Yep, got that. Graham Atkinson.
Thank
you.
Okay.
Tony Harrington.
Tony Harrington. Right, well you've seen, you will have in a minute. That's the agenda for today. It will alter a bit as we go on because we'll shuffle round to fit people in at the various places. But the first thing we're going to do is have a talk by Steve Cook from Metalock, who is going to come down to the front, I hope, with his two compatriots, and he will introduce them and talk about Metalock, which is basically cast iron stitching and other services that they provide.
Okay, well, morning everybody. Thanks for inviting us here for a chat today. I'm Steve Cook from Metalock Engineering, and this is one of our specialist welders. Chris Fry is one of our welding supervisors, and I've got Reese at the back there, who's one of our trainees. He's the younger generation. He's going to pass you some stuff out now, and we'll have a chat about what's known as metal stitching or metal repairs. 75 years ago this process was developed, mainly because after the war there were no materials left and things like that. They struggled to get steel and cast iron, so everything was basically repaired. So the system was developed, and over the years it hasn't changed much. It's not rocket science, but it does work. We have developed it a little bit and change things around a little bit, and as we go through this you'll see that the system is basically the same. The materials that we use are virtually the same, but we have to have them made specially in one of our departments in Germany. The keys themselves that we actually use, which are these. Reese, do you want to give these and pass these around as well? We have different sizes of keys that we use to repair. It's all done cold. There's absolutely no heat, no distortion, no anything into it. The process is the same, but every repair is different, and a lot of it comes down to the skill of the engineer and the experience they've got to decide what to do, how to repair it, the best way to go about it, what your customer wants, and what if it's a pressure vessel. We have to seal it and it has to be tested. It's all certified by Lloyd's Insurance and Bureau de Veritas. Nobody else in the world has a Bureau de Veritas certificate other than us. And the material itself is made of a nickel alloy and has exactly the same expansion rate as cast iron. So obviously, as if it's a steam engine, if it's going hot and cold, or a marine engine, the repair goes with it exactly the same rate. We do massive amount of ship repairs. Everybody thinks, oh, big ships don't go wrong. Believe me, you do. And at a big rate as well. Time is money for them. And when they want to have a ship repaired, it doesn't matter whereabouts it is in the world, we'll just go do it. Which is why I've got to shoot off very soon, because we've got a job going out to QA tomorrow. Anything usually over 6 millimeters, up to about, well, we can do anything thick, up to 8-10 inches thick, no problem. We have another method that we use as well, which is called a master lock, and we can use. Can we get that up, please, Bob? And this was Bob's own repair that you had done in
1984.
1984.
Welcome and apologies. That's the front forks of my roller.
So did they actually snap, Bob? Yeah, they snapped.
No, they didn't.
It just cracked.
They got cracks.
Do you know why it cracked?
No.
Okay.
Oh, well, I assume driving on the hard road,
yeah,
and over cat's eyes, which are a nightmare.
So where you can see here, up here, is where the material's been stitched into it. We put layers of, you put layers of the material and you cut them to what you want and layer them in. There's some examples at the back how the process actually works. And in the middle here, they put what they call a mast torque. Now that is to get the strength back into it. Now the mast torque is made, cast iron into raw forms cast at between 7.5 and 10 tonnes a square inch. EM32B mild steel is 20 tonnes a square inch. That is a piece of EN8 and that comes in at 40 tonnes a square inch. So when you take all your strength returns back into it, you haven't actually lost a lot, you've probably actually improved it. But for our engineers as we're going along, we have to look at this because you can actually transfer any problems or loads back into the other side. And this happens a lot on presses, where press breaks, because sometimes if they've been pressing for a long time, the foundations will start to sink. And then you'll say to the customer, like, they always want, oh, how much is it going to cost, how cheap can I get it? You know, that's normal. We say, well, have you cured the problem? Do you know what the problem is? Oh, well, my foundations are sunk a bit, well, we can't afford to have that done. So you go and repair that side, and you've got to say to them, well, the load is now going to transfer onto that side, which it does. And so you're just putting the plaster over a broken leg sometimes. It's never sold as a permanent repair, it's always a temporary repair. And this was sort of like, it was done as that because after the war, with a lack of materials and things, it was just I suppose, a temporary way till you could get something replaced. But like in Bob's case, that was 1980, whatever,
84.
And it's still good today. We get that a lot, but it's never classed as a permanent repair. But anything usually from 6mm upwards, we can usually do something with. Engine blocks, old vintage stuff that we still do a lot of. Traction engines, I think there's a, Reese, can you give those, you know the traction engine pictures? There's a case study there for those. I don't know whose traction engine was, I didn't get involved with that, but we can usually repair anything from 6mm up to, usually up to about 10 inches, 12 inches, whatever it is, by use of metal lock materials or master locks, what we call master locks. There's always a way around it. We can also get new castings made. I have a really good pattern maker, but again, it's, I suppose, finding a foundry now that wants to do anything is unbelievable because they're so busy at the minute. Foundries are only casting once a week now, and can take a long time to get a casting made now. The system itself hasn't changed. We actually had a scientist, an Italian scientist who we paid a lot of money to try and improve things on load tests, things like that, and he couldn't. So it hasn't changed for many years. The system is exactly the same. We make our own material out in Germany. We have branches all over the world, not just for metal stitching. We also do metal spraying, welding, specialist welding, and the biggest piece of our business is on-site machining. Anything in situ machining, it's all big industrial stuff that is usually big heavy engineering what we do with this. This is just something that's over the years we've kept doing. On other things, we do a lot of steam engine, steam trains. We've done locomotives, yeah. We've done. Oh, sorry. I forgot. I'm in a room. I've got to be careful what I say there when it's towing tender as well. I forgot that one as well. The steam chests and things like that, they all come under insurance. That you've got to have pressure testing. We have a lot of success with those. The Flying Scotsman, we did that. Royal Guardsman, we've quite got Tornado, Tangmere, all sorts of things like that. But everything's doable. Well, not everything, but we like to think that you can always do something with something that's broken. Anything else, like we can also do the machining on the crankshaft, but that's mainly on big ships and things like that. But we can do small ones. And like we also do, like everybody keeps saying about welding cast iron, we can weld cast iron, and Chris is going to go through that with you in a minute. It is difficult to do, and we do it. And we also do a lot of thermal spraying as well, which could be, if you were just going to refurbish a shaft or something like that, you can use the metal spraying technique for that. I'll just pass over to Chris now for 5 minutes and he'll go through.
Just go through the others and we'll show you.
Oh, what, these?
Yeah, there's
I've just passed you some leaflets out that go through the.
This shows another. I mean,
Oh, right, okay.
there wasn't just one crack. I thought there was one crack in the forks. But when they cleaned them up,
Yeah, well, we have to NDT everything, yeah.
riddled.
Yeah.
Go on, David, another one. And eventually, I had to put strengthening pieces in the corner as well.
You just cap that off and we just put a piece in there to strengthen up a little bit. But on this particular one here, the white one, it goes through the process of what it's done, and if you look at the back when you get a minute, there's some examples there and it goes through the stages as it's done. But I'll just let Chris have 5 minutes with you about the welding in case you're interested in that. And this is Chris Fryer, one of my supervisors, welding supervisors, and if you've anything you need to ask after, we'll have a little bit of a question and answer session and see where we go from there.
Morning, how are you? When it comes to the process of welding cast iron, it is a very hard process, and why we prefer to do the metal stitching is because with the cast iron process we have to heat, we have to anneal, so you've got more chance of getting a bit of warp, you've got buckling, so we tend to stay away from it as much as possible, but we do have to do it in a lot of circumstances. We also prefer to do a bit more of metal spraying, and with that, that's more to do with the repair of machining sites. So if you've got it in a bore that is slightly out, we tend to use a bit more finesse with the metal spraying. We can add a couple of mil to it where you can machine it out, you can get your sizes back to where they were. When it comes to the welding side of things, theoretically you don't really want to weld cast iron because of the heat and the energing and everything that you have to do to it, but we have had a lot of success with it. When it comes to cast iron welding with cylinders and things like that, we do not do that because you cannot do a pressure test on a weld when it comes to cast iron. But when it comes to all the other steels, we are more than capable. We have got anything from orbital welders, MIG welding, TIG welding, stick welding. We do all the processes, and we are all coded in the processes. Anything that we do has to be certified. We tend to do a lot of small jobs that don't need to be, but we have to be certified to do them, because otherwise we fall out of our insurance claims. Not really much to the welding process. I think most people do know what welding's all about. It's not worth going through, you put the electrode in and all that, but the materials we do use, we are very specialized. So we can do anything from bronze to cast iron. That's pretty much all I have to say about welding, to be honest.
Fine. The third one, I'll run again, Chris.
Yeah.
They all come hand in hand with what we do. Sometimes we've also done a bit of both. We've done a bit of welding, a bit of stitching, depending on what it is. It's all down, mainly you've got to look at the job, understand how it works, and then design a repair for what you're going to do. And everything comes down to the basic principle is you have to understand how things work and how you're going to return the strength and why it's broken. If you need to really find out why it's broken.
Yeah, of course.
The same with the keys. They've got the XO same expansion as cast iron, and they're made of a nickel alloy, and everything's done cold, so there's no distortion. A lot of the time we can put it back, even if it's broken, because it tends to spring open a little bit, cast iron. We can put a lot of things back without it actually needing machining again. It's done on an individual basis. No two jobs are the same, basically. It's very, very rare that you get two the same. But there's a lot of things going on in the vintage car market and things like that people can't get spares for blocks. We did Ferrari engine the other way. And it's really difficult to get a lot of. I would think in your game now, it would be a lot of very difficult to get spares for your engines now. Has anybody got anything they would like to ask?
Getting in touch with your company is a nightmare.
Is it? I'll leave you my number.
Well, do that then, please, yeah.
Yeah,
I've tried and tried, they've had emails going backwards and forwards and I can't get you to come and do stuff for me.
What do you need doing?
I've got an engine block and a truck wants repairing.
Yeah.
And I wanted my traction engine welding, but I'm coding my own welders to do it myself.
Okay, no problem.
I've still got the engine.
Sorry,
I've still got the engine block wants to do it. So.
And so we are always busy, by the way.
Well, yes, everybody's busy, but you know.
Well, I'll sort your phone number out in a minute.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Anybody else? There are some things at the back of the room that if you want to have a look and go through, Chris will be staying for a while if you need any questions answering or whatever.
What sort of pressure is it good for the stitching?
The stitching we would do up to probably 300 psi. We have done hydraulic pressures, but on small, on like pressure rams that are only going to last very short spaces of time because the insurance comes into it. If it's something that's a ram off a big press or something like that, and the whole place is stopped, they would let us do it, but we have to do it under the. We've just done one at a place in Luxor, but not for the stitching. We looked at stitching it, but we actually welded it in the end. And what's 300 bar?
Yeah, 300 bar.
We welded that one. 300 bar.
That's all.
You have to cool it with the Cooper heat, and the Cooper heat comes with its own settings. So according to how thick the material is, you can only step it down a certain amount at a time. And normally it goes down about 5 to 10 degrees an hour. So that's how
We get
do
a
it.
lot of people that bring us stuff that's already been welded, like engine blocks and things like that. Oh, my mate just thought, yeah, he can weld cast iron, and they weld it. And what you be careful is if you weld something on like cast iron, you will hear it actually when it starts to cool down. You'll hear it crack. It's an horrible noise, but you can hear it. And then you've destroyed the carbon in the cast, so a lot of times you've got to cut a piece out and put a new piece in. It takes twice as long to do things, so really, I mean, advice comes free. I'm sorry we can't go over beyond the phone line, but we'll sort that out in a minute. But yeah, advice comes free. It's you can't beat experience, and that we like to think that we're experts on this job. So it's I hate things that if it can be repaired, I'd like to see it repaired, especially the old stuff. It's really nice to see. And obviously when it is repaired, especially on the metal lock repair, when like say Bobsing, is you can't see it. You really struggle to see it after it's done. Just so like, if you look at the table after, some examples there of stuff that is actually finished. So
Yeah, we've actually, with the stuff on the table, we've put a bit of sulfur on it so it brings out the repair. But normally you wouldn't see it. You wouldn't see the difference between the two materials, which is nice, especially if you're doing a vintage thing. You don't want somebody to see where it's been repaired. You would rather cover it up and make it all look original.
So we've got a guy with a Land Rover engine at the minute, and you look at this engine and think, oh, why would you'd scrap that? But it's number 46 of the original Land Rovers that's been made, and he's a pilot for Cathay Pacific, and he just keeps coming in. He needs to strip it down, he needs to do this. And he's so enthusiastic, he loves coming to our place, you know. He won't give us a cheap flight though, but I understand why he's done it, because in the vintage market, everybody, I suppose it's like you all like all the numbers to match. Is that a thing for you? I don't know. Yeah, because that apparently puts a lot of value on it, so that's why he wants it repairing. So we'll sort of, but yeah, people like original things. We do, you know. All our guys are into vintage stuff and things like that. We're all petrol heads and things like that. It's just you can't help it, can you? So. Yeah, so if there's some samples at the back of the room, Chris, you got anything else you need to say?
No, to be honest.
Okay, well, if you've any questions, come up and ask. We'll be here for a bit yet, so thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
Right, Tony. You move. Very much.
Morning everybody. Nice to see you all. Quick introduction for me, because some of you know me but some of you don't. So obviously I'm Tony Seddon. I've been around engines since I was 15, so more years than I care to think about at the minute, really, to be fair. I've been sort of helping Dave with TSU for quite a few years now. I've lost track of how many, it doesn't matter, it's irrelevant. Dave decided he wanted to sort of start to step down a bit. Now he's reached sort of 21, and he decided that he wanted to sort of start to ease back on things. So he approached me and said, "Well, I'd be interested in taking the TSU over with a view to running it for him." So that's sort of where I've ended up in this sort of role. It's not true that I was asked to take over the role to raise the height profile of the TSU. Clearly, it's not true. Just a minute. Yeah, there you go. You see, well, it is true then. I have raised the height profile. So that's just one sort of thing I would like to say. It's very early days. It only. So what we probably should say is thanks very much to Dave, because I know. There's an enormous amount of work that Dave has done over the years in TSU, and to be fair, he's done quite a lot of it single-handed, and I don't think many people actually realise quite how much he's done. So I think it's worth saying thank you for that, because I think it's a good effort, to be fair. We've had a bit of a watching brief as TSU. So the role of the TSU is a watching brief. To keep an eye on sort of the technical matters that might affect the road steam sort of fraternity, and it's sort of keeping an eye on things and advising on things like health and safety matters, keeping an eye on the law sort of stuff, reviewing how that would perhaps affect us, and listening to sort of government feeds to make sure that what's coming down the pipeline from our lords and masters in Westminster doesn't adversely affect what we do. We sort of keep that watching brief going on, and we monitor various services coming out of the government and keep an eye on all of that. We look at the implications of stuff that's coming out and decide whether we need to intervene or not, and then we sort of provide that support also in the background. So that support is provided to the members, and provide technical backup to the General Council members as well, so we get involved with all that sort of stuff. So we assist the other sections, so we assist like the engine owners section, we assist the rally organisers section, we'll help with some of the documentation, and we'll go through those sorts of things. Now clearly the most pressing issue that we all face at the minute, and I think it's not going to go away, is environmental issues and fuel issues, because the environmental lobby have got a huge say in things at the minute, and they've got a massive amount of sort of pressure that they can apply. So we'll all have seen that in terms of the fuel and coals issues that we've been having. I'm not going to dwell on that because Tom's here to talk about that, so I'm not going to go into that in any depth. So in order to be able to do that effectively for you, the members, and for the non-members as well, effectively, and also for the General Council, is we needed to build a team, because when we were looking at doing this changeover, it was such a big role that Dave was doing. It meant it was very, very hard for anybody to just step in and take it all. So it was clearly important that we have a good team to do that. And I'm very pleased to say that we have got a good team formed now. It isn't a one-man band anymore. We've got a lot of people coming around us. And that team bodes well, I think, for the future. So I'm just going to give you a quick flick through of the people who are involved with that team. And sort of give you a heads up of who's doing what and where they come from. So clearly you've got me stood at the top, just keeping an eye on everything and making sure everything goes on, and keeping an eye on things like legislation and stuff like that. We've got Tom, who's going to talk to you in a minute about the coal and the fuel sort of side of it, and he's been doing some sterling work on that. There's a huge amount of time and effort gone into all of that sort of work, and it's been done really well. So we owe Tom for that one. We've got a new member to the team, a lady called Charlotte Garbutt. Charlotte is a lawyer, but she's also from an engine owning family, so she understands what we need out of things, and she's joined the team to sort of provide the compliance sort of side of it and keep an eye on that side of it with us in terms of the legislation and so on and so forth. We've got Colin, who's in the room somewhere. So he's hiding, there you go. Colin's here. He's the V765 sort of officer that deals with reclaiming lost registrations and so on. So Colin's there tickling away on a few things at the minute for people who've got engines they want to get original numbers back on. We've got John, who's sat at the front here, John Durling. John is the I always get that the wrong way around, the FBHVC representative. So he goes to FBHVC meetings on our behalf to hear what's said and to report back, and also to tell them things we need them to understand.
That is the
Federation of British Historic Vehicle Clubs, yeah. We've also got Louise Maunder, who's joined the team. She's effectively disc officer, so she deals with disc issues. There are a number of the disc issuing agents about that will send you your discs out when you ask for them, but there are a few that don't work in that way, so Louise deals with those discs and deals with the other aspects of sort of that scheme of it. And then last but not least, he's not run away quite yet, so we've got Dave providing support services. So when we say support services, we're talking about all the systems that go in the background, so the disk systems and various other bits and pieces, and providing the sort of the technical backup in terms of the IT and the support sort of side of it, website, etc., etc., etc. So Dave's staying on that, and he's able to assist us and support all of the general council. So that's the team really that we've managed to build, which I think is quite a good team. To be fair, we've got a good breadth of knowledge. The people that are in these roles all come from a technical background, so they all sort of that technical-minded sort of bent about it, and can look at what we need to do and do it in a sort of more analytical manner. So that's the team. So what next? What's the TSU going to do next? What are we looking at? Well, I say it's early days. We are starting to sort of think about what we're doing. But one thing I can tell you is we're going to continue to build on the good work that's been done under Dave's tenure. We're going to keep going on the stuff that's already in process. We're going to continue with the coals and fuels situation, so that's got to be done. And we're going to continue to build on the links with the outside organisations. So we link with people like the Heritage Railway Association and the Heritage Fuels Alliance, and also we try and link with the government where we need to try and do that. So we're going to continue with all those things. But one thing I would say, it's actually your NTET as members, it's your TSU that effectively that's there. So if you've got any burning issues of a technical nature that you think we should be looking at, that you may not be aware that we are, or we may not be looking at, then I'd say to you, please tell us. Come to us, drop us an email, give us a call, give us a shout, tell us what you think is important. The other thing that I would say is that you may become aware of things that we may not have spotted, because we're not perfect, nobody's perfect. We do try and keep a good eye on stuff, but there are things that I've seen that are flagged up to Dave in the past that Dave hadn't seen. So if you see something that you think is going to affect us, give us a shout, let us know. We may already be on it, but we may not, and it's worth us understanding that. So please give us a shout. The email's there. We've taken the email over from Dave, so we see that coming in now. And literally, if there's anything else you think we should be dealing with, please give us a shout. And that's all I'm going to say. So thank you very much.
Good morning all. I think it's just morning still. Yes, it is. Yeah, excellent. Okay. I will give a brief introduction to myself again, because I was officially rolled out to the NTET, I suppose, at the Engine Owners Conference last year, which was about 10 months ago, so not quite a year ago. At that point in time, obviously the situation around Fossey-Fran was seemingly very dire, and there was an awful lot of pressure on what the alternatives were. So I feel like I joined the team and specifically showed my interest in looking at the coals and manufactured fuels as something that I felt was very urgent and pertinent. And the reason why, obviously it affects all of us individually who are engine owners, but I've been in this hobby sort of since I was very young, and at the time was looking to purchase an engine, which I'll come on to in a little bit, but it's kind of a topic that was very close to my heart, and as it is for everyone else. So what I wish to do today is give a recap of where 2022 was, so a bit of a review of the situation from last year, I think that's important because there has been an awful lot of progress and challenges faced in that time. So I think it's important just to recap where we were. I'd then like to touch upon or do my best to explain what my plan is and how I'm trying to make this work, which I'll show in a slide and talk through as we go through that. And again, the reason why I want to do that is there's many different ways that people will think about how we need to solve the problem of coal and fuel supply. I wouldn't say there is one solution that's perfect, and I wouldn't say that there's one method of achieving that. But I think it's really important that I try and share how I'm approaching it. And again, like Tony said, I'm not perfect, so if you see something that you think is being missed or should be addressed differently, please raise it, and we can discuss it and act accordingly. And then finally, I want to give a recap or a summary then of where we are today in 2023 and what I'm working on for the rest of this year. I think the most important thing to say is, and it's become very apparent to all of us, I would say, there isn't a single golden bullet to solve the problem. Right? This is going to be progressive work over a number of years now to get to where hopefully we feel comfortable with a fuel supply and probably realistically multiple different fuel supplies that work across a range of engines and applications. Okay. So now I've said all that, I'll move on to some of the slides. So back at 2022, as I say, when I became heavily involved with this, approximately 10 months ago, we were faced with a situation where the supply of Fossey-Fran coal, certainly to the heritage sector, had completely ceased. It seemingly came about overnight, certainly to a number of us, and there wasn't really a clear answer as to whether it would return, certainly for the heritage sector, which was a big awakening call, I would say. We know that Fossey-Fran has a limited lifespan, but for it suddenly to be turned off obviously left us in a sticky situation. That was compounded, as I'm sure you all remember, by the fact the intention was always to have alternative lump coal supply, certainly for the railways and therefore the heritage sector as a whole, from Russia and a couple of other countries. And of course the impact of the war has quite rightly seen those supplies diminish and dry up. Obviously there are pockets of Russian coal still available, but there isn't any more coming in. And obviously it's a choice as to whether you would use that or not. So that had a second impact. It's been almost the perfect storm, unfortunately, 10 months ago. Compounding all of that, as I'm sure you're all aware, because we've all felt it in the price, the global cost of fuel skyrocketed. So to put that into context, coal is a traded commodity, and at the point in February, March time when this all started to kick off, the commodity price of coal went up 2.5 times. So that's the traded value of coal across the board, which obviously did get pushed into the heritage sector because we are a consumer of coal. So not a great picture, and I think that's sort of the important thing to keep in mind. This time last year then I presented on what our strategy was for 2022, which I think it's fair to say had to be reactive to that situation. There was no other choice. So this is just sort of dividing effectively how we as the TSU divided our time and the things that we were working on at that point in time. So number one was to talk heavily with Fossey-Fran and Hargreaves, who are the main distributor, or sole distributor for Fossey-Fran coal, and try and understand what had led to the demise in the heritage supply and what could be done to re-establish that. That was absolutely key, and I know obviously a topic that I've talked about a lot. Backing up under that obviously was then important to start looking at what the other suitable coal supplies could be. But I have to admit, because of the fact that a number of manufacturers pushed forward ovoid products, namely Hargreaves, who offered Trevithick ovoids as the replacement for Fossey-Fran's demise at the time, my attention had to turn to those and whether they really were a valid solution to road steam. So that's why you will have seen, certainly in the last sort of 8 to 10 months of the work that I've been doing, a lot of focus on those manufactured fuels, because that was the important piece to understand and get control of. So I'll talk about that in more detail as we move through. And then the final segment, which I've sort of purposely represented as smaller than the others, but by no means any less important, was dealing with the political side. So that's dealing with government legislation, any impact from the government, and ensuring that our profile was represented, which was really effectively done by Lord Faulkner, who's an advocate of the HFA and therefore works closely with us as part of the TSU and the NTET. And he put forward to the government a formal question. So whilst it takes time for all these things to filter through, he was able to ask of the House of Lords what the government is doing to protect and provide opportunities for fuel to the heritage sector. Right, and whilst that's just an open question, it was deeply discussed. It's a recorded conversation as well, which is available for all to find online. And we actually put out at the time after that meeting took place. And I guess I want to just touch on it a bit more, because it's easy just to dismiss it as it was just a conversation in government. But those conversations are really important. Off the back of that happening, a number of fellow peers, so representatives in the House of Lords, have made the effort to approach their heritage railways and the heritage sector and have communication as to what the problems are. Now, it doesn't solve anything overnight. It never does with government. I think we all know that. But ensuring that that touch point is there, those conversations are happening, is absolutely key for how we progress through this in the future. So, as I say, it's not an overnight fix, but it's really important that it is discussed. And then finally, at the top, I put educational, and I guess in this I include a whole range of topics around fuel. So some of that has been me doing my best to communicate which of the manufactured fuels have worked well, which of the substitute coals that were available last year were working okay or had issues. But it goes a bit further than that. It also includes trying to share the message with the general public, those that attend steam rallies, of the pressures that we face, and a small element, which by no means is small in terms of the topic, but small in terms of the amount of bandwidth I have to deal with it at the moment, is deciding how we approach this from an environmental point of view and what message we put across. That has to be coherent and it has to be accurate. So it's very easy just to react to that and sort of make some statement or try and address it in one way. But ensuring that it's correct and effective and isn't damaging ultimately to us as a hobby is key, certainly in my opinion. Okay, so the next bit I want to try and explain is how I am approaching this, and this is the bit that I do open up to people to sort of add information or add your input into. So 2022, if you imagine there's a timeline going across the top, 2022, obviously TSU in particular, its focus is on monitoring, reacting and responding to legislation that affects road steam. That is fundamentally the purpose of the NTET and the TSU, has the watching eye over that. So that always continues. Obviously, as Tony touched upon, the environmental side has increased, so we're ever watchful on that side. On these two boxes then, I guess 2022, our focus was on supporting Fossey-Fran and trying to ensure there was a supply back into the heritage sector. That absolutely continues. I know there are issues around that yet again, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail as we move through the slides. Obviously backed up then by seeking alternative thermal lump coals. It has to be the right coal, it has to be of the right size, and we have to be able to import it into the UK in an effective manner and then distribute it. So there's an awful lot of work in that as a topic, but absolutely that is something that's ongoing. And moving down to driving the development of the manufactured fuel, so a lot of work done on that. The NTET, I feel, has done a fantastic job collectively, members and non-members taking part in the trials, feeding the data back to me so I can provide that onto the manufacturers. I think is an absolute credit to the movement as a whole, quite frankly. And then finally, the box which is purposely shifted along to indicate that we're not really working on this yet, but it's absolutely on the agenda at some point, is the supply and the development of alternative fuels that aren't dependent on coal as a base subject. Now, I know there are people trialling that. A number of the railways have looked at oil-based, like oil byproduct manufactured briquettes and things. I am in touch with those, but at the moment we're focusing on these activities, and then we'll move on to that at some point in the future. Now, I do want to clarify on that. That isn't the NTET taking a back seat on those fuels. This is in partnership with things like the HRA, who have obviously more access to railway locos, and their infrastructure is bigger, the touch points is bigger. So we are actively letting some of these activities run with them, but staying in touch with them. And some stuff we've taken the lead on and then shared the information forward. So the collaborative working between the HRA, the National Traction Engine Trust, and dare I say that's now under the banner of the Heritage Fuel Alliance, has been excellent in the last 12 months and will continue to be developed. The wedge-shaped bit, which again I'm just trying to show it as a visual representation of how this pans out in my mind, is the communication and education on coal manufactured fuels and how we go about that at all. So it's a wedge, because I don't feel that's been the thing consuming the biggest portion of our time, and I don't think it should be at the moment. But it absolutely needs to be there, and it needs to be something that we develop as we get more and more stabilised on some of these other problems. But we have done some things. So, where we are right now. Top picture is Fosse Fram mine, so let's talk about Fosse Fram. And I am just going to quickly refer to my notes because I want to get some of the facts in here. So, in the last quarter of 2022, the mine has been beset by a number of landslides and impacts from weather, and these have been quite significant landslides, stopped the mine from operating, required safety measures to be put in place to shore up the road network effectively around the mine, and obviously that stopped production. It's no secret, and I have said it before, the heritage sector makes up about 7 to 8% of the coal extracted from the mine. So obviously their priority has to be to keep supporting Tata Steel. That is what keeps the mine open and operable. And anyone who's from a business background has to appreciate that has to be their mainstay. What's been really good is having had the meeting back in May where the NTET and HFA were on site at Fosse Fram, which again was a collective effort between a number of people, including one individual, Bill Giles, who I know sort of was single-handedly trying to get contact point with the mine, joined forces with the NTET in communication primarily through Dave Smith, and by joining together meant that a meeting could take place at the mine, which was a great step forward, and saw the supply of heritage coal resume pretty much on the day we were there. They started grading and washing it for the heritage sector. So I guess I'm labouring that point to say I know it's been a bumpy ride since that point. That supply has demised. If you were to phone up a coal merchant now and ask for Fosse Fram coal, I'd be very surprised if they've got any. However, the mine is operating again, and the heritage side, the heritage wash plant and that side is operating. Confirmed to me yesterday. Sorry, yes, so there's a question just.
Tom, where are we with the political relicensing of the mine?
Yeah. So if I will get on to that in just 1 second. So what I would say is coal supply back to the heritage sector. If you start speaking to merchants in the next 2 weeks, they probably still won't have any supply. But the intention is the pipeline will be refilled by Easter. Okay, so just keep that touch point. I know a number of people have commented on Facebook in particular that it's dried up. And it has in some cases. So in terms of the extension, you're quite right, the mine is currently still extracting coal. In terms that they had a licence period which should have expired in Q4 of last year, so what we always anticipated that Fosse Fram would stop at that point. Their planning licence was against a quota of coal to come out of the ground against time. They hadn't extracted the full quota, but they had obviously hit the time bound, and that was due to COVID and various other things as to why they hadn't extracted as much coal as they anticipated. So the mine has put forward its request for an extension, its formal request for an extension, which is being reviewed at the moment. So it doesn't have the approval, but it's under review. They continue to extract during that time, which is permitted as far as I understand. So they're continuing to mine and operate whilst that extension plan is reviewed. So that's stage one of the proposal or the activity. The second stage is the proposal, which is to extract a further 1.7 million tonnes of coal. As far as I'm aware, having spoken to Hargreaves yesterday, I don't believe that application is in yet, but it's planned to be in. And where sort of the NTET, the HFA come into play is we're willing to put our support forward to that application for the benefit of the heritage sector. At this point in time, we haven't been asked to do that, but our offer is there to back that up from a heritage point of view, should it be needed. Okay. Does that answer your question? Okay, lovely.
There is the problem that they is against the policy of the Welsh Government to grant another licence.
That's right.
At the moment.
So all the way through my presentation, unfortunately, I'm going to flip-flop between a good news story and a bad news story, and you're absolutely right. Whilst it's a good news story for us from a heritage sector, extracting coal from the UK's largest coal mine is not a popular thing for a number of people, and there has been a nearly 21,000 strong petition submitted opposing the extension going forward. So we are not out of the woods by any stretch, and obviously, you know, all these factors stack up, good and bad, on either side of the argument. So I have to be honest and share that information because it's in the public domain. Yes.
Sorry, Tom.
No, it's all right.
So if there's a petition on one side, can we do a petition on the other?
That's a question I thought might come up, and I guess that's one we need to consider carefully, right? Because it carries weight in two ways, doesn't it? I feel, and this is my opinion, so it's personal opinion rather than the NTET one, I feel the correct activity is the NTET, the HFA, HRA should do exactly what we are doing, which is supporting the extension application through a formal process, as in we support it from a heritage sector, which would be seen as part of the package of information. My personal nervousness would come from if we tried to do a petition to say we want a mine to stay open, that we potentially raise our profile as heritage coal users as opposing voice to those that are green lobbyists. And I'm not sure if that's a good thing or not, right? So I am purposely sitting on the fence in my statement because that is up to the NTET collectively to decide which side of the fence. Yeah,
definitely.
So some people will feel we should fight fire with fire. It could work very well. All these things are you tell me what the outcome's going to be. You know.
Is it going to be raised on the national then?
Sorry, say
is it going to be raised, the idea of... I mean, you just said your opinion and Dave's agreed with that, but are we actually going to ask the national what we're going to do as a body?
Definitely.
I think it's a topic that needs to be discussed by the NTET as a general council to start with, and then that goes to the point of it should be considered. Okay. Ultimately, we are representing heritage traction engine users, aren't we, as a function? So whatever we do has to be correct for the majority or correct for everyone in the perfect world. Yeah.
I feel pretty sure that Tom will mention this in any case, but I think we've got two options that are real options, and one is not to stick our head above that parapet at this point in time. The two options I consider are important are what is already mentioned, and that is putting our name on the bottom line to the application for extension along with the other heritage bodies, but also putting our endeavours towards the manufacture of alternative fuels.
Can I just, I'd like to just give you a bit of history about Frossifran, because I finished with the British Coal Open Cast in 1995, and at that time we'd been pursuing Frossifran for 11 years, and we hadn't got a planning permission then. We couldn't because the town of Merthyr were so vociferously against it. It then took another, from 95, I think the planning permission eventually came in 2002 or around there. So you can see that that planning permission was fraught, and it was against the town of Merthyr. Merthyr didn't want it at any price. Why, I don't know, because the ground was a mess, and a real mess from previous mine workings that hadn't been properly restored. I'm talking about quite considerable time ago, and it was really a derelict site. But there was the town of Merthyr, and there were one or two people in particular, were vociferously against it, and it took, well, if you add it up, it took nearly, well, over 15 years to get the planning permission for this site to go ahead. Now, I don't hold out a lot of hope for an extension, because you're butting up against that and the Welsh Government. We can try, that everybody should try, but don't hold your breath, in my view. It's going to be hard work, and first of all we've got to get by the Welsh Government, who have said no to any more open cast coal in South Wales. And then, having done that, you've somehow got to get past the local planning people. That's right.
Can I add to that, Tom? Frossifran has gone through a number of owners over this period of time that Bob has been talking about. They've not been the best of neighbours, some of them. And that's what's the problem, the major problem now with the residents of Merthyr. Coal is a dirty industry, it always has been, always would be. But the residents of Merthyr feel that they've not been looked after in terms of fly, dust, and other stuff, road conditions. The current operators have doubled down to try and improve on that. And I know this sounds dated, but the damage is done. That's the problem. The damage is done. So there's a lot of wishful thinking here, and we've got to keep our fingers crossed, which brings me back to that other focus that we should be looking towards the alternative supplies and what we can get from that.
There is one thing that may impact on the extension. And over the past, some of the previous owners have not put money into the restoration fund. And when you finish an open cast site, it will take 2 or 3 years, or maybe longer, to restore it. And some of the previous owners of the site have not put enough money in to fund that restoration. And it may be, and I don't know the economics of it because I haven't looked at the application, but it may be one of their strong points is that they need to mine this extra coal in order to put enough money in the tin to restore the site eventually. I don't know.
Very complex, isn't it?
Yes,
It's
that
very
may
complex.
be an avenue that they will pursue. Whether it's successful, who knows?
So you can see with all these additional complexities, it would not, and the problem with the Green Lobby, or the problem with the Green Lobby, we might shoot ourselves in the foot by shouting loudly when there are other things at play that would undermine that. We should keep our powder dry, basically.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, it's quite all right.
Sorry, mate.
Look, I know this one's tricky. It's an emotive topic that affects us all, so it's bound to prompt discussion. But yeah, exactly. You can see that Fossifran as a topic is complicated and ever developing. The reality is Fossifran will be finite. You know, even with the extension, if all goes favourably, it will come to an end at some stage. There is only so much that they can extract from the site thereon. Which again adds to the importance of what the alternatives are. So hopefully, picking up the everyone's thinking it's the end of the world. Hopefully it isn't.
Sorry, just the other
Maybe it is.
just the other complication of Fossifran is, well, you know that the government having given permission for the mine in Cumbria, it's now been challenged in the courts by the Green Lobby. Well, when the planning application gets, when the planning application gets approved for the extension at Fossifran, the next thing will be a trip to the court by the Green Lobby.
Okay. So anyway, there we are. So the better news stories, at least. I think this one sits on a rocky place at the moment, as I say. But let's move on to the other topic. So the coal trials. As I said earlier, I think this was a good success of the NTET and its members and non-members alike working together to provide data. Those I am considering now as complete. So the coal trials that we did over the last 12 months. If anyone has data that they wish to send me, then it's still useful. It will still be inputted into the spreadsheets and shared with the manufacturers. But I think we've got to a stage where we know enough about a handful of fuels that give us some answers. And I will talk about that in a little bit more in a second. Apologies for the pause there. So the things I wanted to touch on there is off the back of the trials taking place, we've been able to understand what we believe to be like a golden ratio of the properties that make up the manufactured fuels and those that work well for road steam. That ratio is different for some of the railways, so it's been really important that we are strongly represented as road steam users in our own right directly to the manufacturers. And I am going to share that ratio and some of the products that I think work very well off the back of it. There was an additional trial put in place at Bedford Rally, which some of you may have seen, where we tried to run a tweaked blend of one of these products, two of these products in fact, under what I consider to be demanding conditions. So that was running the skid as a fairground ride, so it's obviously something where you put a large demand on the engine and therefore the fire. That wasn't particularly successful, there's no bones about that, and this is part of the development process, right? It's not going to be perfect from the start. The manufacturer of that fuel, which was CPL at the time, they're now called Home Fire, have actively made a variation of that product off the back of how the Bedford trials went. And I received that fuel yesterday to trial. So we're going to keep going with this. Yeah. Well, lucky in some respects, but yeah. So the work continues. What I want to put across is my focus in 2023 is shifting a bit more towards alternative coal supply. Back to my graph earlier showing how I'm approaching this. Rather than the manufactured fuels. I think it was important to do manufactured fuels last year because of the fact that triffidic ovoids were being pushed so heavily to all users, so we had to understand whether that worked or didn't work. And now we have a few products that I can say do work for the majority of people, use my words carefully there, then it's time to put more focus back onto supply of coal. And that comes with another bit, apologies if I'm jumping around, but it's a difficult topic to get through. The commodity price of coal has actually taken a tumble in the last few weeks, driven primarily by the price of gas as a commodity changing in Europe. That's attributed to the fact that actually we're having a more mild winter than first feared would be the case, although you might not believe it today. So that's now is the right time to be looking at alternative coal sources from around Europe because they're effectively competitively priced. And that potentially opens up opportunities that when I was trying to have these conversations 8 to 10 months ago were just dead in the water based on economics of scale. So now is the right time to be pursuing that with vengeance, and trust me, I am. So that's the next one, is the alternative coals to Fosse Fran as a supply. So a lot of work did go on last year, and as I say, a lot of it was then hit with economically unviable, the wrong type of coal, unable to get it in the correct size. That is almost certainly the case on most sources that I look at, is there some sort of complication or it's not going to suit our needs well enough. But we have 3 that I'm working on at the moment that are the right type of coal. One in particular already has a export route into Europe, so it's an African coal that has an export route into Europe already. The HFA have taken the lead on the discussions on that. There's been a bit of progress in the last week or so. The one that I'm personally working on is a coal seam that runs down Eastern Europe, which is a thermal steam coal, and there are 2 active mines on that site. One I am actually working on business very close to it in a few weeks' time, so I've arranged to meet with the commercial director whilst I'm over there. As I say, it's the right type of coal. Their normal size of distribution is effectively fines up to 50 millimetres, so it's small size. And that may be what puts that one out of being viable. But we're having they know what my need is, they understand what a traction engine and steam engine is, and they know that we need it in a larger size than that. So the conversation isn't dead in the water, but the reason why I'm sharing that data is all of these things have complications along them. It's not as easy as finding a mine that's still operable. It then has to be economically viable to get coal out in the size and type that we need. And then be able to bring it into the UK at an effective price point. So I don't have huge amounts more to share on that at the moment, but I think I've sort of worn my heart on my sleeve a little bit with that last bit. That, trust me, that is #1 priority for this year, is to try and progress some of those. Any questions? Because I can see a few people.
Did you say you had 3?
Yeah, so the third one, you're quite right, I touched on 2 there. The third one is an Australian source, which we did start the discussions last year. I think there's no secret that there's someone who works for the mine is a traction engine enthusiast in Australia, so he started numerous bits on Facebook, which is how I got to know him. So I know the fuel works well in traction engine applications because he uses it. He's competent at running engines. The reason why that one didn't progress was purely economics. Shipping coal from Australia is hugely expensive. It certainly was when we were having the conversations sort of 8 to 10 months ago, when global shipping was diabolical in terms of its price point. Having some involvement in that type of industry, it has actually dropped. Certainly shipping from China has dropped quite considerably in the last sort of 3 to 4 weeks. So that conversation is still active, but at the time I parked it because it wasn't viable. So I guess what I'm trying to put across is it's numerous spinning plates at the moment, and it's trying to keep all of those going and getting the right information at the right time. Okay. I intend to move on from talking about coal now, so is there any questions, since we've sort of had questions back and forth? Yes?
Well, thank you very much for all the work you're doing, Tom, which it is appreciated. All of the fuels you've mentioned so far still contain coal.
Yeah.
Are you going on to something else now other than that? Or?
So I guess if I go back, this is sort of where my timeline in my mind, I'm not sure if I explained it well enough as to how this works. So if you're looking at time across the top, I see the urgent thing to do is ensure that there is coal, you know, because that's what we know, and our engines are set up to use it presently. Obviously the manufactured fuels, you're quite right, still use anthracite, petcoke, coal as their constituent parts. CPL in particular, now Home Fire, obviously took the lead with trying to develop biomass as part of that mix, with not very successful results for those of us in road steam. But they tweaked and modified some of their ideas around that, which has been really good. So that's where it drops into what I consider this green box, which is what are the options beyond coal, you know, when coal is no longer viable. I guess the thing perhaps I need to explain if people aren't so clear, sorry, but I'll just finish this one thing.
Yeah.
Lump coal as a commodity is increasingly more challenging to source. Like coal overall is still widely used across the globe, but generally in fines, you know, it's sort of blown into boilers. So a manufacturer, these manufactured fuels are able to take that product that almost certainly has a longer extraction life than lump coal is likely to be around, or certainly viable for us as small number users. So to my mind, this is an important part of the transition to this, and this at the moment it's still too early in the development stage, I guess is what I want to say, to be a solution for us just yet.
I know some of the narrow gauge railways in Wales particularly, that probably from a railway point of view is as near to a traction engine as you get, are using various fuels that are organic, if you like, if that's the term.
Yeah.
With varied success. And I didn't know whether you looked into.
I have to admit that's where I sort of mentioned earlier that the HRA are doing a bit more about it. I've forgotten the name of the product. There's one which is like an oil seed byproduct that's compressed into those. That's it. Yeah, that are compressed into those yellow briquettes, which I think is it the Taliflin put one of their videos up where they have these bright yellow blocks on the engine. So I talk to the HRA on a regular basis and how they're getting on with that. I have to admit, just simply due to we're trying to spin multiple plates and work on other things, I'm comfortable letting them continue with that work and them sharing the data back. And then when there's a point where we can actively pick that up, I think it makes sense then for the NTET to get involved. So it really is about information sharing at this stage. And things like the Australian coal source came obviously through myself, through the NTET to the HFA collectively. Obviously HRA are working on other sources of coal that they share into the same source. So, yeah, collaboration is key. Yes.
I think we should just mention West Cumbria Mining. The application which has now been approved but is going to be challenged by the Greens. That mine is designed, and the planning application is for coal for the steel industry. There is no part of that planning application, as it is at the moment, that allows them to take out lump coal or anything else. The coal goes to the steelworks either here or is exported, and that is the way that they have worded their planning application. So if they get the go-ahead, if they actually mine the coal, which you're talking, if they started today, it would be probably 3 years before they produced any coal, but they're not starting today. The other thing is there's a coking coal, and it may not suit us because the coking coal, I know people are hanging their hats on it, but coking coal is coking coal, and it will clog up, depending on how you fire your engine, it will ash on the bars and form clinker on the bars. So even if we can get it, which is a big question mark, even if they get the planning application, they start mining the coal, there is still a big question mark as to whether somehow we could get that coal.
Tony, there was a rumour that to get to the coking coal, they've got to go through bituminous.
Yeah.
They've got to go through some ordinary stuff. Is that true or not?
So from my, I don't know if you know more, but from what I understand, I've heard the same rumours, and in perhaps more official capacity than just rumours per se, but with no data to back it up at this stage. So officially I'm using the same words as the HRA used in their announcements, which was a cautious welcome. And what I mean by that is we need to be close to what's going on, but there isn't a definitive, that's our solution, we go with that.
But you've got to remember
Drift.
you've got to remember what has been agreed so far with their planning application is for coking coal.
Yeah.
And if they change that, there are a lot of other problems up there as well, but that's where we are with that, I believe, at the moment.
Yeah, I think it just to clarify,
Don't hold your breath.
don't hold your breath, but definitely not classing it as completely dismissed. You know, that's the purpose of me trying to remain neutral in this role as best as possible, is to try and take exactly as you've just discussed the facts behind the application, and then what do we require, and is there somewhere that we can play in the middle? And if there isn't, then we move on. You know, there's only so much time you can sort of chase it, and that isn't going to work. So for me, it's still an open discussion point. Perhaps not necessarily stacked as heavily in our favour as we would have liked. Yeah.
Right, mate, that we're on a slippery slope here, aren't we?
It's tricky, yeah. Don't get me
Not
wrong.
tricky, it's worse than that, isn't it? Basically, 5 years ago, this sort of started to rear its ugly head. Now we're at this situation. In 5 years' time, where we're going to be? You know, there ain't lumps of coal coming out of the ground to be sold at the coal merchants so we can put on our steam engine. The days of going to a coal merchant and saying, "Can I order a ton of coal, please?" are getting very, very, very scarce, very, very rare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it ain't getting any better. And it's going to get worse and worse and worse. We're on a slippery slope.
The daft part about it is the world consumption of coal is increasing.
So it's the Green Party.
Mm.
And you've got to fight that. Hell high water. Because they're educated at schools now.
I know.
Smoke comes out of a chimney, that's dirty, that's dangerous, don't go near it. And that's not going to go away.
No, you're right, it's not going to go away.
No,
And
and it's going
we
to get
are.
worse and worse and worse.
But that's
We are
why, if you look at Tom's slide, there was a bit about education. Oh, it was on Tony's slide.
Yeah, it was on mine as well, covering education. You're right, it is difficult. I guess I'm not going to use the words a slippery slope, because to me that means that there's no hope, right? And to me, there is options out there.
Absolutely.
It's complicated.
Yes.
It's always been relatively easy in this country to get coal, right? I can only talk for my lifetime, obviously there might be times where that wasn't the case, but certainly in the time I've played in this hobby, coal has been available. We've been spoiled by having Fossey Fran widely available, most rallies had it, etc. We've all got used to it. But that isn't going to be the picture going forward, and there isn't a definitive, we just replace like for like with something else. You're right, lump coal from coal merchants is a thing, not necessarily in the past, but certainly in demise, and not helped by the fact that the sale of house coal, is banned this year in May, that in England. So it is a complicated picture. Lump coal is still mined, as I've sort of touched upon the three that we're working on, but it's getting the right type of coal.
Well, in 2030, they're now saying there's no going to be no diesel or petrol cars produced, right?
Yeah.
So therefore, after that year, why you have to off debt and everything, that fuel will be, don't use that no more or anything. So us using lumps of coal for these bits of kit that weren't designed to be around in the year 2023, it's going to be getting worse and scarce, isn't it?
It's getting scarce, but there's two things I would say here, for what they're worth. There's nothing in any UK legislation anywhere that bans you burning coal on your traction engine. Nowhere. The problem is that of supply, and that's what Tom's been paying his attention to. And it may be that in its endeavours to make some headway, that the NTT has to dig deep in its own pockets to put money on the table to secure supply. Then it's going to turn to its members and say, no, we've got to put our money where our mouths are.
You say there's nowhere in law that says I don't have to burn it or anything, yet.
Well, yeah, and that's why we act as a watchful eye.
That's exactly where we come in,
Yeah, that's the role that we're playing.
And back to my point earlier, to me this is why it's so critical to have people like Lord Faulkner raising the profile with the House of Lords. You know, whatever your political views are in such situations, his peers are critical to making sure we have some representation in that field. And I think it's in a good place from that point of view. We're far from out of the woods in terms of we're good forever and ever. But for me, this will be a topic that remains on our agenda probably for the whole time that I'm an engine owner. And I hope this isn't a slippery slope. Otherwise, there's no point, is there? We might as well stop.
And dare I say in front of Tom, for as long as we've got someone with a nimble mind like we have here,
Great too, no
there is
problem
hope.
at all, yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
As engineers, Tom, I don't know whether you came down the A5 to get to here.
Yeah.
But 2 miles down the road on the roundabout is a gas filling station, and it says future-proof fuels on it. Maybe we've got to look at other forms of fuel
Possibly.
to get that barrier that Alan just talked about over.
Yeah.
You're right, and that's sort of why I sort of go back to my timeline. That short term, coal and the source of coal is probably the most desirable thing, so therefore my attention needs to be around that. But longer term, it has to be on what the alternatives are. And it would be remiss to say we just jump straight to this stage,
Yes.
because the delta, the gap between what we're used to up here and being here is too big, and there isn't enough development work done already. So to my mind, what we're doing is buying ourselves time to effectively jump from this one to this one to this one to hopefully this one. And I still use the word hopefully because I haven't necessarily positively seen something that solves the problem in either of these two categories for everyone yet. But we never envisaged being at this stage at this point in time.
No.
If you rewind 18 months ago, we knew FOSS would demise at some stage, so the intention was there would be a most likely Russian source of lumped steam or lumped thermal coal coming into the UK that would satisfy our demands. We would have had we'd be talking about a different topic right now. We'd probably be talking about CO2 perhaps, or something based on that. But at the moment it's more pertinent just to look for a source and then move on to this and deal with it in the future.
Definitely.
All of these things come with a barrel of complication around them, don't they?
Just to throw something just into the mix here. Really, I suppose what I want to say here is you can see the amount of effort and time and input and weight we are putting into this, to try and keep everything in play. There's a lot of good people working here. As Tom keeps saying, it's not a closed door. We are keeping going. We will keep going to do this, and we're looking at every opportunity. So bear with us.
I'm glad you raised the point though, because you're voicing what I know a number of people feel. Trust me, when I phone around coal merchants and you can't get hold of coal, you start to think, crikey, it has that effect. But hopefully there's some steps going in place that improve it.
Well done, Tom.
I'm glad you come.
I'm glad I volunteered.
Do you mind sharing your day job with us?
And you want to know what I do professionally? Yes, yeah, so I'm self-employed in the automotive industry on various things from project management to quality consultancy. So a sort of technical background, data analysis. What are you thinking?
Just wondering your qualifications for the job.
Yeah, so not background in fuel or
no,
chemistry per se, but in manufacturing, engineering, global supply. Am I okay to move on? I think I've covered everything. We've jumped around a little bit. Okay, so trying to park coal to one side and perhaps what the alternatives are in the shorter term, the manufactured fuels. So obviously, as I said, a lot of work has gone into this in the last sort of 10 months or so. The coal trials and the data sheets that people provided back have been invaluable in gathering this information, being able to make these very high-level statements I'm about to talk through now, but equally in being able to feed that back to the manufacturers of the fuels and their development with us. And as I keep saying, the road steam movement really has taken quite a big portion of that work and communication with the manufacturers in that feedback loop and how those fuels have developed. So I guess my traffic light type system here, I'll start with the good news and work the other way because I think that tells the story a little bit better. So for the manufactured fuels that have been trialled and have had good feedback, which I'm going to list 4 of the top ones on the next page and the reasons why. Generally for rally use and light road use, so you're turning up at a steam rally, being able to steam up, trundle around the rally site, go to the pub or whatever in the evening. The majority of these manufactured fuels work well enough for those purposes. And this is absolutely fundamental to being part of the solution going forward, because they are readily available. There isn't an obvious end date for when they'll be available, because of, like we talked about earlier, the fact that they are made up of fines as opposed to lump coal, so it gives us a greater opportunity, or gives the manufacturers a greater opportunity of mines to get the base ingredients from, and obviously the bulk with which they combine that in. So that is a real key point to the longevity of steam rallies and their operation. And it may mean as users, trust me, I prefer coal at the moment, but it may mean as users we have to accept that at a rally we'll get provided with a manufactured fuel. We use that for the purpose of a rally, and perhaps we have some coal of our own or from another source. You know, some rallies may provide it that you use for some of the other activities. And I think that's probably a pragmatic way that we should approach our thoughts in 2023, rather than just blindly saying, I don't want manufactured fuels, they're all rubbish, which obviously I hear all the time from some people. There has to be this level of accepting that it is part of the solution of trying to get out of the situation that we're presently in. So I deem that a major success from where we were sort of 10 months ago, and I know I've mentioned it a few times. I picked specifically on triffidic ovoids because the data showed overwhelmingly they weren't a success for the majority of people. Obviously a number of rallies purchased them, including one that I'm involved with, so we suffered the same fate. Not all manufactured fuels are equal, and that's the key bit on my next slide. So having a little bit of knowledge about these fuels is important for us as end users, right? In the same way you choose which coal you'd like to burn, we need to be thinking the same when it comes to a manufactured fuel. So then my yellow category, again, based from the data fed back, for normal roading use, so that's sort of covering your 20-30 miles road trip, towing your living van, etc., over normal running conditions. A number of the manufactured fuels I'm going to list on the next page have worked well enough for most users. So some have had bad experiences of them, including myself on one engine. There's been issues around pinkering and higher consumption. For some people, absolutely superb. I know 2 people in particular who've moved away from using coal altogether and gone onto these manufactured fuels for everything. So there's a yellow category basically saying it's a solution that's working pretty well for a number of people in most cases. So that's another good news story as far as I'm concerned. And obviously as this development process continues, hopefully that becomes a green box where it works for the majority of people in this situation. The one where there's definitely more work to go is the high demand use. So I mentioned Bedford Rally earlier, where we tried to run a demanding ride on an engine. I've detailed that in the NTET's latest steaming mag, just basically explaining it's very good at getting the engine up to steam to full blowing off pressure. Started off particularly well, but pressure drop over time was fundamentally the problem, as in the recovery time when you're off the load of the ride, that didn't seem to build enough heat back into the fire quickly enough to work. So we know this is still an issue, and whilst that example is specific to showmans on a ride, it's also true of higher demand engines. So I don't wish to pick particular types. I'll give one example that I'm close to, like a Foden 6-tonner, for example. So something that's most of the time is high demand on the fire because it's sort of fast running, etc. Potentially sits in this category as well. I know some sensible people have struggled. So we know there is more work to be done in this category. But that's why for 2023 I'm saying I feel we have to accept that manufactured fuels potentially are part of the key for steam rallies. and work continues in these categories.
On that, I mean, obviously with the manufactured fuel, it's a different firing technique.
Yeah.
And is that one of the problems in the high demand use, that we haven't got the firing technique right?
Possibly. In some cases that's a definite yes, because like all these things, it's a learning process for all of us. You know, I would say probably very few people have tried manufactured fuels this time 12 months ago. I certainly hadn't. I sort of knew it existed, but hadn't really messed around with them at all. So one of the most common observations in the early days of trialling these was the need for a deeper fire. Because that's a really easy one to try and fix your solution. Longer term, if this becomes a more common solution for someone who chooses to move over to them, it may be things like if you look at your firebar spacing and grate height and blast nozzle size and all sorts of other variables, but that's down to, unfortunately, that has to be down to owners fine-tuning of their engine according to the fuel. And all this, I mean, I can speak from personal experience, all this happened back in 2007-ish when Fossey Fram came on the market. I remember people messing around with blast nozzle sizes, changing over to cast firebars when they've been quite happy with other stuff. And, and I guess we've been lucky because we've had a common fuel source consistently for all that time, which perhaps isn't necessarily the picture we're looking at now. So to my mind, it's a little bit of just openness to trying to find what fits best, and then perhaps there's a bit of fine-tuning that individuals may wish to carry out, but it's individual's choice at that point. Any other questions? So I'm not looking at a room of very smiley people, unfortunately, but it isn't as bad as perhaps. So just hopefully concluding on the manufactured fuels, I mentioned the golden ratio earlier, so as far as I'm concerned, what the NTET data has shown, that products that have a mix of about 30 to 50% anthracite, and then the rest made up of, say, 50 to 70% made up of bituminous coal and or a percentage of pet coke, with a resin binder, which is quite key, and they can be pressed either hot or cold, seem to be the fuels that are consistently working the best in road steam applications. So that isn't a hard and fast rule. If you buy this product, it doesn't mean it will definitely work for you. But from the data gathered back, that's what's working the best for the majority of people. And the four fuels that had consistently the better results around this, and in the main fit with this ratio, are listed at the bottom. So CPL's Wildfire, just to be clear on that initially, before these trials took place, was molasses bound. That led to some concerns, particularly from the Heritage Railway side, over deposits on the firebox. So they have changed that to being resin bound, which saw the deposits, the cause of the deposits, I think it was sulphur content, reduced significantly to less than that of coal. So it's eliminated that problem, and that's the value of doing these trials. Obviously, I've put the percentages up there so you can kind of see. The other then are Bright Flame, which I talked about in my data previously, New Burn, which is pretty much bang on the sort of higher end of the pet coke ratio, or the pet coke and bituminous ratio, seems to consistently work well for a number of people. And then there's the sort of new one to the party, which slightly breaks the golden ratio, but seems to be working well in a handful of cases. As in the data I've had back, I haven't had a lot of data back, but seems to be consistently good, is Burnmore Blend Plus. And I believe South Cerney Rally ran on it with generally good effects for most people. As I say, it's never perfect for everyone. I can see a question hovering again, so
Tom, do you know if the resin is the natural resin or is it the manufactured resin?
It's a variable between different manufacturers, and as far as I'm aware, it's a manufactured resin for the ones I'm talking about, but I will check that because I don't know definitely.
Traditionally it was molasses.
Yeah.
And there's been a move now to polymers, manufactured resins.
The molasses seemed like a really good idea for many reasons, really, because it's a natural product, etc. So it's sort of good from that side. But because of this high deposit concern, obviously it made sense to move away from it. And again, I think that is to credit to the HRA, the NTET, and equally CPL for going through that iterative loop and doing something about it. And CPL continue the development work.
Your
percentages there, there's quite large variations, you know, at any given brand name, there's quite a large variation. Does that mean that the product you get, you buy one bag of wildfire, for instance, and then 6 months later you buy a bag of wildfire, it'll be different?
It's a good question. And the truth is, this data comes from DEFRA. So DEFRA, to become classified as a smokeless fuel, the manufacturer has to provide some baseline data to DEFRA, which is validated in a lab, etc. DEFRA publish that to the public domain. So most manufacturers will only state a range when they put that out. CPL in particular are vehement on their quality control. They're perfect lab testing conditions, batch control. Obviously that's my field, so I'm interested in that type of thing. So I'm confident that anything you get from CPL is repetitive and good. That's not to discredit M&G, just simply I have conversations with David Grand, who's the G of M&G, quite regularly. They do lab testing. I haven't personally seen those reports because I haven't asked for them. It hasn't been relevant. The products I've had quite a lot of burn because I personally quite like it. It's just a personal preference. I find it consistently very good in that score.
Yeah, we've been using it at Klondike, so
I can certainly push for the data. They wouldn't be reserved in providing that to a body like the NTET.
But all those manufactured fuels use anthracite and coal.
Yeah.
Where are they going to get it from?
So this goes back, sorry I keep going back, but it's important that we get clear on this. It's all part of this stepping process that as time moves on we need to look at what the alternatives are. So there's a longer life in manufactured fuels, back to the point that coal finds and etc. are available from more global sources, more mines are extracting in that sort of 0 to 20 millimetre size.
Yeah, the point I'm making is it's still got to be imported.
Yes. Yeah. Britain isn't keen on mining coal anymore, is it? And therefore that's the complexity we have to face. I personally don't feel we should tie ourselves in knots in that just yet. You know, we need to consider environmental impact, etc. at some point. But if we try and jump to that straight away, then we bypass all of this and we're stuck trying to solve this problem down here, which is hellishly complicated, and there isn't an obvious answer yet. So that's why I keep labouring this slide, and I'm glad we keep coming back to it. It's got to be this step transition to keep it viable. Any questions? I feel like people are teetering on asking stuff.
Might be about to hang you, you know.
Yeah, I know.
I think Tom, what you might consider is that the people like CPL and M&G have a hell of an investment in the future. Yes, as ever, the heritage movement is down in the corner of the demand, if you like. But to their great credit, they've listened to us and to you, and they've tried to meet our requirements. And that's to be lauded, to be honest. And they're in it for the long haul. They're not going to shut up shop. And I think we should learn to live with them.
Yeah.
And what the results of their endeavours.
Yes.
What was the experience with storage? We saw last year Facebook of a rail network having a delivery of 20 tonnes of manufacture in the open, left out in the open. What did it disintegrate over time?
So you're right. There's been some mixed results on that, and I can't speak specifically for the one you've seen, but certainly from the storage concerns I saw, they were primarily going back to trithydic ovoids, which were 100% anthracite with like I think it was cold pressed, and I'm not really sure on what the resin binder was. Some people speculated it was a cement-based one. I'm not entirely sure. But I used to do this demo at rallies when trying to explain this to people. If you got hold of a piece of trithydic ovoid, you could crumble it in your fingers almost like an OXO cube. And with the fuels I've mentioned, you can't snap them easily. CPL have told me if you want to do a sort of dirty test, basically, they call it the heel test. You put it under your heel and sort of crunch your heel into it, and if it breaks up, then it's not compacted well enough. So the ones where I saw pictures of it crumbling, I believe was that product or a similar product that hasn't been pressed well enough. I also read and have seen people commenting on the molasses ones causing concerns with vermin. I have some of that stocked at home. I haven't seen a problem. That isn't to say it doesn't exist, but the products that I'm recommending are all resin based. I've got those sort of stored at home with no concerns over them, because there's nothing really to attract them within that. I can't tell you whether it degrades significantly over time. Like, obviously talking to the manufacturers, they say not. Obviously give it another 2 years with the stocks we've got around us in ourselves, we might say differently, but again, cold degrades if you leave it in direct UV. So yeah. Okay. Well, hopefully I'm going to be able to wrap this up now. Okay. So my conclusion is I didn't think it was a bad news story, and I still don't. I think it is a complicated story, and I think compared to where we were 12 months ago, where I couldn't really see what the paths needed to be to get out of the situation we're at all, we're in a much better position from that point of view. As in, there is a strategy in place, and as I've said a couple of times in this, I'm open to people saying if you think we're missing something or a different tact is needed, then share it. You know, this shouldn't be the NTET solely doing this activity. It shouldn't, and it isn't, and it shouldn't be me solely doing it on behalf of the NTET. So share and help as you see appropriate. Obviously, 2023 is beginning with Fran supplies being a bit on the scant side or non-existent, but I am assured that is an improving situation, and I will be in contact with Hargreaves and mine in the coming weeks to ensure how that's playing out going forward. As I mentioned earlier, they are strategically aiming to be back up to good stock levels for the heritage sector by the summer season, i.e. Easter onwards. So that's something to be kept in mind. I do touch upon the fact that there is other lump coal available, but unfortunately the picture is so variable now as different merchants and distributors have different quantities. I can't give a definitive answer on what's where, so it's best just to contact whoever your regulars are. And unfortunately in some cases that is none, in others it's limited supplies. Obviously I mentioned earlier that we get the ban on household coal in England, which is an added complication, but I think we're already seeing the effects of that in terms of the lump coal that is available. The big one for me then is sourcing thermal coal that's appropriate for the heritage sector is challenging, but that is the big topic for 2023. Obviously a load of work done in 2022, but my big push on that this year. And that manufactured fuels are available. Having spoken to the key manufacturers, certainly the ones I mentioned there, they have good quantities around them. I'm not going to get into discussing price point because that is entirely out of my control, and obviously it's a global commodity that's traded. But they are at least available, and I think offer a good solution for the majority of users in terms of rally use and potentially building activities for a good number of people. So that's where we're at. Hopefully not a terrible outlook, but still plenty more to go.
One just before we wrap up, one thing I would like to say. I think it's fairly clear to everybody in the room we've got the right person on the job. The work that Tom's been doing has been huge. He's spent large amounts of time on this, and I personally thank him for it on everybody's behalf, because I think what you've been doing has been absolutely superb, to be fair. And I'd also like to thank the people who contributed towards that, and that includes the suppliers who contributed and are continuing to contribute and talk to us on this, because I think if we work together we will find some way that we can continue to play effectively, isn't it really? But Tom, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Just one thing. When you're looking at thermal coal, it's not Fran. We will not, or it is very unlikely that we will ever get anything equivalent to Fran in this country. So what will come in will be a bituminous coal, which will be a smoky coal. It will not be an anthracitic coal like semi-anthracitic coal like Fran, because there ain't that much of it in the world. There is some in Russia and other places which make it prohibitively expensive to bring it in.
Yeah, it has its complications, definitely. Yeah.
So when Tom's talking about a thermal coal, he's not talking about a Fran type coal. And that's where a number of people, you go to, in the past, have gone to a merchant and they say they want some steam coal. Well, steam coal in the general terminology is stuff that goes into power stations to raise steam. It's not and a number of, in the past, a number of rallies have been caught out by ordering steam coal and it's not come as smokeless. You've got to, if you want a smokeless coal, it's Welsh dry steam coal equivalent.
Okay. Any other questions before I run away? No, thank you very much.
Thank you very much,
Tom.
Tom.
Thank
That
you.
was- I think what we'll do now, I think we've come to a point where we might have a break.
We've done last year and plans for this year. So last year was a welcome return back to normal. We had 5 driving days going ahead with upwards of 50 apprentices taking part. In addition to those days, the Steam Plough Club offered us some places, some discounted places for Steam Apprentice Club members on their hands-on weekend in September last year. We had 6 places available, but unfortunately only 1 apprentice took part because it was a little short notice of places being available. This year we've got, we're finalising the dates of our driving days as we speak, and I've also been in touch with the Steam Plough Club again, so hopefully we'll have a few apprentices on their hands-on day later on in the year. We're always looking to add driving days to our events, so if you think you might be able to host one for us, all you really need is a few engines, drivers and a private location. And it's generally just a good fun day, teaching the kids how to, you start punch sheet, get them to ash out, clean the tubes, send them in the firebox if you want. But yeah, it's just a day of raising steam and having to play on your engines. Lady Sylvia, our miniature, went to a couple of events in 2022, most notably the Dorset Steam Fair, where it was in our little members' playpen. It also went to the Sutton-on-Trent Festival with Bob. It's currently with me for a bit of maintenance over the winter, and we're also preparing it for hydraulic test, which is due early on next year. We're going to use that as a teaching tool at the driver training course, hopefully. Dorset Steam Fair was the main event we went to last year, where we had a committee presence. And new to our display was the members' playpen, which is a fenced-off area outside the NTET marquee, and we had about 10 miniatures at a time, filled with apprentices, basically playing around all week. Due to that, we got over 140 new members during the week of Dorset, which is well over double our previous record, which is, shows how popular that playpen was. The regular competitions, Formula Mamod and the cavalcade that we run on the Friday night, were also very popular. And we would have liked to have done it again next year, but unfortunately with Dorset skipping a year, that will have to be in 2024. But with Dorset skipping a year, we're hoping to visit some different events over the course of the summer. On to committee matters. So the SAC does have quite a small committee at the moment. We're always looking for new members who might be able to help us out, even if it's just for a few days or a few hours at an event, manning the stand, running Formula Mamod. So please do get in touch if anyone thinks they might be able to give us a bit of their time. Thank you.
Any questions?
Don't go.
Anybody got any questions or comments?
Could I just add something, Bob, if you would allow?
Okay.
I wrote this bit in Steaming, the last edition, not the current one that's coming out. For various reasons, I spent far more time in the NTT's marquee at Dorset than I have done in previous years. Enjoyed myself, but it was an eye-opener. It really was an eye-opener, because I saw all these guys first-hand working for the benefit of the younger members, and they worked extremely hard. But there was only a handful, there was less than a handful of them. And I'm thinking, crike, for how long can we expect this small bunch of people to sustain this level of activity? We can't.
Now, I did say to Nick at the time, and he maybe have forgotten, but why did he not consider holding a conference like this sometime in the future for the SAC itself and getting the parents and the grandparents and relatives all together under one roof so that we can get that support that they really, really, really do deserve. It's great to lend them your engine and have them climb about your engine, that's fine. We send them, it's like having the grandkids, at the end of the day you send them back. That's the end of your commitment. But that doesn't work for these guys, and I just 4 or 5 days I've just watched them powering on, but it started to get painful. And I started to worry, and I want to share that worry with yourselves, because they can't carry on at that level. That's me finished. Thank you. As Tony so kindly said earlier at the start of the session today, almost at the start, I decided it was time, long overdue really, for me to move to one side. Tony's been part of that process for a long while, but he was probably getting a bit fed up. Is he ever going to let me get hold? Well, I decided it was time. I turned 80 in September, which is brilliant, had a great time, great party, and I thought, hold on, how long do you think you can carry on like this? And my memory's not brilliant these days, and so you forget things and you start to let people down. So come on in, Tony. Now, I wouldn't have asked Tony to come in, frankly, if I didn't think he was the man for the job. I'm very proud of what we've achieved as the TSU. It's not just me, and so it wasn't just going to go to anybody, but I can tell you, I'm quite chuffed that he's picked it up and he's built the team around him. Together we've done that, and we've set the ship going in the direction that Tony wants to take it. I've not disappeared, as you can see. I'm sort of carrying on doing little bits, particularly on the business systems side, if you like, the IT side. I've stepped out of the political arena very nearly. We're just holding hands, we've got a little finger hooked together at the moment, holding on. But soon we'll let go entirely and it'll be his baby. So I'm concentrating for the time being on what we call support services. I'm just going to give you a little bit of an insight because there is something important I want to share with you. We look after the website. When I say we, myself, Nick Bosworth here, and Naomi Cornish, who is also doubles up from time to time as the General Secretary. She's also one of our techie supporters. She's very, very good, as is Nick. So we look after the website, we look after the content of the website, we look after the linkages to other services, we develop the pages, and we also, it's the entrance to our join and renew portal, as we call it as well. We look after that there. We've got the online membership management system, which I wrote the very first version of it many years ago, and it was entirely manumatic. That was adopted from Sue Cook when Sue and John used to do the membership secretary all those years ago, and it passed around. It's currently been managed and looked after very well by Rich Semple, and that's been a baptism of fire for Rich, because Richard was not a techie by any stretch of the imagination. Point me in the right direction, wind me up, let me go and I'll do it, but I've got to know what I'm doing. And he's taking this on very, very well. But in a nutshell, the membership management system holds all of your membership data, when you paid, how you paid, when you're next due to pay. It will generate the reminders that you get at the back of Steaming. And although we don't use it very often, it has got the facility to send you an email reminder should you desire that method of working. And Richard feeds from that system, and from it he generates the membership cards and then sends them out to you. One of the irony is that we cannot print those cards from the system, unfortunately, because of the way that we've designed them, and we didn't want to throw that legacy away. So he manually churns those out, and he works that system very well indeed. Fairly recently, in the last year, we've moved the insurance disc system up onto what we call an online system. Now, hitherto, Walker Midgley had their version of a disc management system written by ourselves. James Campbell had a version. Footman James had a version when they were about, and one broker had a version when they first came onto the scheme. And all those versions sit individually, or sat individually, and at the end of the working week, they would send data to Ian Cooper, who was the insurance officer at that time, and he would run a little process, meld all that data together, and stick it into the disk system. In between times, you would have had your discs through the post from the various brokers and so on. They were complaining to us that it was heavily manual labour. It was an additional burden on them that they hadn't counted on when they became insurance brokers or became part of this scheme. And we worked for a long time to see how we could reduce it. Well, the way we've reduced it is to take the system online. So all 4 or 3 brokers, including Louise Maunder, generate the data all online, one great big database. None of the individual brokers can see each other's data. It's almost like they've got their own system, but it's a common system. And from that, they generate the disk, press a button, and the disks go out by email if they want, or they go out as a letter. The major difference, which has had a bit of an impact, I know, is that the end game is that you, the receiver of the disk, have to print it. Previously, the disk would arrive on a piece of paper that you just cut out and stuck it in the disk holder. Well, this new system, you actually get the disk on a letter or on an email and you print it. Or, I haven't got my phone with me, you can show it on your car, on your phone. To some people, they see that as a disadvantage, and I understand that. But in terms of slickening up the system, it has made it work incredibly quicker, and it's far, far, far less expensive to run than the old system. One of the important features of the system, there are 2 actually. The first one is that previously, on the manual system, the NTET, as the issuers of the disk, the owners of it, always had their backside close to the fire, because the time of knowing when the boiler inspector's professional indemnity expired to us getting to know that it had expired was a long time, and in between time insurance discs were issued when technically there was no insurance. And we said, hold on a minute, well, if you talk to the rally organisers, they will tell you how important the disc system is to them. It's a doddle. They'd sign up onto the website, they'd look at their rally, they'd print out the number of the attendees that are coming. Is that at the time of our rally, will that disc be good? Yes, yes, no. No, yes, 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 no. They don't have to walk around every one of the exhibits to find out whether they've got a current disc, because the system is telling them that they've got a current disc. So they then only have to go to the dozen or half dozen or however where the crosses are. So the rally organiser is really pleased about this scheme, really pleased. NTET frets about the fact that if they issue a disc, or they issue one of their discs is issued that says this thing is good to go, because that's how it's interpreted, and the boiler inspector hasn't handed over the money to his to his professional indemnity insurer, and things go pear-shaped, it's like the bagatelle machine. The ball is coming down to the lowest common denominator, and at the bottom of the pile it says NTET. Don't want that. We don't want that at all. So in this new system, what happens is 30 days before the boiler inspector's insurance expires, they get an email from this system automatically sent saying, hello, good morning, heads up, do you realise on this date your insurance placed with so-and-so and so-and-so expires. That's it. And the system waits and waits and waits. If the inspector reports his new certificate to Louise Maunders, she goes onto the system and she updates the certificate details. End of story. If we don't receive that information, the system shuts down. Somebody at Walker Misley tries to raise a insurance disc and then she can't get the insurance details up because the system has locked out the insurer whose PI insurance has expired. We get emails from Walker Misley or from the others, can you nudge so-and-so's elbow because we can't issue disc. So now we've got clients banging on the door saying, I've had my boiler inspected, I haven't got a disc. Talk to your boiler inspector. So we then push another button and we send a reminder to the boiler inspector that you've had a reminder, can you do something about it? The system will not move, we can't override it, and our legal department says to us we must not override this facility. It's absolutely boxed in that we can't issue a disc if the inspector was not insured to inspect on the date of that inspection. Simples. So that's one thing I want to make important to you, that if there is a delay, it's most likely going to be that we've got a PI expiry and we're trying to chase it and get it sorted out. That's that one. The second important feature to this, again, is built in to try and make life a bit easier for everybody involved. I've just been talking to Dave Woodard, who's sat at the back, good pal of ours is Dave, and he shares his opinion quite freely. Sometimes we don't like it, sometimes we do, but there we go. That's what life's about. And he said, hold on, he said, what you're going to tell these guys this afternoon is not everybody's cup of tea. And I accept that, I accept it. But the reason is this. We've introduced just now, we've not broadcast it, it's ready to go. We're going to talk to the boiler inspectors about it very shortly, where they can report directly to this system the outcome of your inspection. We're not bothered, we've got no jurisdiction over the little bits, the notes, this is wasted, this one's doing, that one's doing. If your boiler inspector has issued a certificate of go, can be steamed at this pressure, all we ever wanted in the past was that piece of paper. What you can do now is sit in front of a laptop, look on your phone, at home on the PC, and you can actually jump on this system as an authorised boiler, well, a recognised boiler inspector that's authorised to work the system, and you can dial up the details that you want and say, good to go, there's my boiler report reference, there's the date of next examination, there's the working pressure, end of job. And we've offered that facility because some boiler inspectors asked us to do it. I'm just going to share it with you. I'm not saying they must do anything. We've never ever said anybody must do anything. But it's a facility that we believe will make life a little bit easier. But as David's pointed out to me today, if I haven't got an internet signal sat at the place where I've just done my inspection, it won't be in that instant that you're going to get that. I won't put it in there and then. There's no point. I can't even make contact. And sometimes, when I've had a long journey home, the last thing in my mind I want to do is to sit down and get on this bloody thing because the NTET wants me to and tap this details in. I'm not saying he should. I'm not saying. I'm just telling you that that facility is there, and the boiler inspectors, there's several boiler inspectors shown an interest in getting involved in it, and it's there to be used. Okay, so I'm sharing that. The insurance disc scheme couples very closely with the authorised event services. We've just seen Alan Holmes. Some of you may know Alan, a long time associated with the Road Roller Association, a photographer, amateur photographer of some skill, and to be seen all over the place. And he's joined us quite recently to run the authorised event services system, which we work with. And the insurance discs and the authorised event scheme link together. The data that they generate, some of it gets pushed up onto a website that the authorised event organisers can visit, and they can look to see what the state of discs are, They can also look at the code of practice, and they look at government documents, and they can look at what we call the Purple Guide, which is a vast 22-chapter document produced by the Events Industry Forum, of which we are founder members. And that really does tell you how you ought to be running your event. Not necessarily a steam rally event, but any event, any sort of event. And the last thing that I get involved with, and I alluded to it a little bit earlier, this is not just David Smith, by the way, this is what I'm just heading up, if you like, holding the reins for. Nick, again, involved, Naomi's involved, and we look after the officers of the NTET, people like Rich Semple, who got literally plummeted into running the membership management system, hadn't got a clue, didn't know which way up the thing should stand. And we sit and we hold hands and we work them through that. And we can do this in this modern day of working. We don't have to go and drive up to Shropshire or up to Lincolnshire or whatever. We can do it over the wires, which makes it ever so very, very simple. So that's the nature of the job that I've moved over to. I was doing it before, but that's my sole focus now. So I thought I'd just share a little bit of it with you. Yes, sir.
David, the event today, are we live or are we recording? And in the future, what are we going to do about two-way with the remote audience to ask questions, etc.?
I'm not sure I understood you. Are you talking about a forum?
Yeah. Well, we had last year and the year before we did this conference online. This year we thought face-to-face would be advantageous, added to which Kathy can come and sell some books as well. And we were going to run this as a hybrid event online as well. There's one problem here, there's no internet. Right? So for next year we shall be maybe looking for a different location. That's where we are at the moment. We fully intended to run it as a hybrid, but no internet really scuppers it, and there is no plan at this place to put the internet in, unfortunately.
Because obviously in the world we live in now, as David just quite rightly said, we're doing two-way over the internet, and I just wonder how many members could make it today and are sitting at home.
Well, it's a very good question, but I think, as Bob said, the die was cast, the venue was chosen, and there are empty seats, as you can see, obviously, which is slightly disappointing. But our next meeting of this nature will probably be much better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We shall certainly be looking for a venue with internet, so we can do it.
We have to
the benefit of this place, and it's not a benefit, is that it's almost in the centre of the country. If we move elsewhere, we need to bear that in mind as well. People travelling. I mean, our chairman's not here today, he wasn't, and the secretary's not here, but they're coming up from Devon. Kathy's come over from Boston, Lincolnshire. So we're trying to get somewhere in the middle. But it is something that was on our mind this year. But we asked about internet here, whether they're thinking about it, and I don't think they are. We'll ask again before we organise next year's.
There's one thing, it's not necessarily entirely bearing on this, but this is sort of a social statement really. As an IT professional, as a business support professional, there's lots of pluses, but there are some negatives about remote working and so on. How many of you have met friends today that you haven't seen for a while and swapped notes? I believe that's really, really, really important that we can do that. And over the wires, it's not really the same. And when you see somebody fell asleep in particular on the screen, you actually see that they fell asleep. That's not very good either. Andrew, can you behave yourself?
Excuse me, I'm wide awake.
I keep nudging you.
I joke. So I totally agree with you. We should take advantage of every technology that presents itself, but don't let's discount meeting up face-to-face like this. Yeah, because I love hearing Alan telling me you don't like me. I don't care. Great, that's been done.
But it's been recorded, isn't it? And it's been recorded for the purposes of putting it online, so people
Yeah,
can see.
we'll put this online.
Assuming the technology's worked all right, yeah.
And at that point, we can invite people to ask any questions. All right, it's not quite the same, but that's what we'll do this time. But in the future, we are looking at to hybrid it. As was the last two AGMs were done in a similar way.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's support services, gents. Any questions, and ladies? I'm sorry. Good. I'm out.
Right. Right. Every time we meet, I ask about this. Something you've done, something that's unusual. Please, if you could just write it up and put it on as technical tips to go in steaming. It doesn't have to be. If it's a close shave you've had with doing something and you think, well, somebody ought to be aware of that, you can either put it in under your own name or put it in under anonymously. But it's important that we educate people when you've had those sort of close shaves. We had one some years ago, you may remember it. Somebody was working on his own in his shed on a Sunday afternoon with an angle grinder, which jumped, and he was in a serious situation. And that's the sort of thing that we want to know about, to just remind people that these things do happen. And similarly, when you're dismantling an engine or maintaining an engine, if you find something that, ooh, that shouldn't be cracked, and if I hadn't taken it off, I wouldn't have known about it. That's the sort of thing we want to know about, so that we can pass the information on. So that, and also it helps with steaming and so on, to put stuff in steaming. I think there's a couple of things I ought to mention as well. We are members of the Heritage Railway Association Boiler Code of Practice meeting. And there's a history to this, that we, when we produced our first code of practice, we were concerned about boiler inspectors, independent boiler inspectors, and the attitude that the Heritage Railways would take to independent boiler inspectors, and if they were going to do anything. And we invited then the chief man in the ORR to come down and talk to us about our code of practice, and I think he came down to us with a bit of misgivings, but went away with a code of our practice, copy of our code of practice, which he then circulated to all the railways. So it did do some good, and since then we have been members of that Boiler Code of Practice Committee. It only meets twice a year, and they are busy drawing up all sorts of codes for various things. One of the things we realised that there was nothing in our code of practice about is tubing, and how you should tube a boiler, and what the alternatives for ferrules and all the rest of it. So that's something that we're looking into on our code of practice, and that came up at the last meeting. The other thing that comes up, we do hear about quality of tubes and quality of rivets and so on, and if there is anything that's important, it will get out from them via our website or via our code of practice. The other thing that you may be interested in is that there was a lot of talk about gauge classes, and there's a variety of theories about gauge classes, but one of the things that made me sit up was what other railways say said that they change their gauge glasses every time they wash out the boiler. Now, I'm not suggesting we do that. That's only information that one railway does. Others do it less frequent, change the glasses less frequently, but it's something that we tend to ignore a little bit. But they can get particularly worn on the top where the steam's coming out and going back into the boiler.
And brittle.
Yeah, and brittle. And Irving Barraclough used to have one that he used to bring as a sample until I think somebody dropped it.
I was in job with it.
Oh, yeah. Which is razor sharp on the top edge where it's worn away. So it's something just to be aware of. They do wear out, as do the Klinger glasses as well. And there was an article, I think we put an article somewhere in about Klinger glasses.
I did.
Yeah, you did, because you found yours.
We did, didn't we, Dave?
About 5 years.
Yeah. So Klinger glasses don't last forever either. So those are a couple of things that came out of the last meeting that we had. Eventually, all the codes that they're producing, forget what the guide notes they are, will be available to us on their website. We've got to wait a bit of time for that. There's a bit of dispute as to whether they'll be restricted to HRA members. It doesn't matter to us because we can get hold of them, or whether they should be freely available. The ORR, who were the instigators of this committee, believe that they should be freely available to everyone, as we do with our code of practice. That's why.
I think that's changed Bob now, isn't it, this year? You have to be a member of HRA
Ah,
now
yeah.
to download.
We do at the moment, but that's under discussion. At the last meeting, Steve Oates was there, first time he's been, and he hadn't realised the significance of the meeting and why it was set up. And shall we say he was sent away to think about it. So it's possible. There'll be a change there, I don't know. The other thing is that we are again looking at our code of practice to see where we need to update things. I mentioned tubing. Tom, who's here, has been through our code of practice, found some anomalies, and we are looking to put those right. So we shall let people know when we've done that. So those are really the technical tips that I've got at the moment. Have anybody got anything else? Dave, you got any? Any nasties that you've found that we ought to be aware of? Any questions, anybody?
Tom, I think there's a point that Alan made right when Tom was talking, and it was true at the time we were speaking there, and it's true here. It reminded us that what we're working with, playing with, if you will, was never intended to be working to this length of its life, and that requires special attention, I think, and we should remember that.
I would say that. How many of what percentage of our engines are now over 100 years old? I would have thought probably 70% or 80%.
Don't take anything for granted.
Bob, there's been a debate on traction talk over the last couple of weeks about boiler treatment. There still seems to be some confusion about what the best boiler treatment is and what route is recommended. Is that something that the technical committee could look at?
Yes, I mean, really all I did was go and look at what was available.
The problem
Years ago.
we have looked at this in the past. There might be some paperwork about Tony Bob.
Yeah.
One of the challenges. There are several challenges with boiler treatment for traction engines. Each product might not suit the conditions of its neighbouring product.
Yeah.
So they've got that variation as well. That's the starting point. Then you've got to consider where you geographically are, and what's the starting condition of your boiler when you start to introduce boiler treatment. Because frankly, you could do more harm than good sometimes by introducing too much boiler treatment at too late a stage in the game. So what I'm telling you in a very complicated way, it's not an exact science.
And indeed that's been recognised, but things like what the pH value should be seems to be open to debate.
Yes.
So I'm just saying that there's been a debate. I've not been party to it, and I just wondered if it was something.
If I can go back many years ago, I had a friend who was in scientific stuff, and I asked him what I should use as boiler treatment. And so he gave me this formula and put so much of this in, so much of that in, which I did. I ended with it primed and primed and primed and primed. So we stopped that. And then again, coming up to 2-3 years ago, I put boiler treatment in at the beginning. I just filled the boiler, done the steam test, done everything else, and I can't remember, I think we were at Ashford Bank at the driving course. We nearly emptied the boiler.
Oh yes, I remember that. Spectacular.
Yeah. So I mean, it's not a science. It's not as easy as you say.
Yeah, but the point there is there is a common value, isn't it? What's the pH value that suits that we ought to be aiming for? Well, it's a range really. It's not one figure. It's a range.
It's a fair question, and I think it's probably something we need to think about a bit further. So yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing that I am doing at the moment, I've been trawling through some of the back issues of steaming, looking for technical tips, and I am sure that there's something about boiler treatment, which I'll dig out.
Definitely. It ought to be in the code of practice as well.
Good. Are you volunteered?
Not yet. I'll learn that game.
Good. Any other questions, comments, things that we should be looking at? Good. Right. Rallies, well, we're in the handover stage at the moment, so there's nobody here from the rally organisers. So the next one, I think, is Andrew.
Oh, right. Just get my leg working and then we'll be right. No, I'll try not to, John. I have to make notes these days because I've got to that age. But a couple of observations on the discussions before I start on best. I appreciate the enthusiasm for taking several dozen rollers and surrounding the Houses of Parliament to make our point about the coal situation, but based on what we've done in the past, we've always achieved more by going about it quietly. Civil servants and ministers do not like losing face. So we've achieved a lot in the past on various different aspects that have impinged on the hobby by just going about it quietly. I mean, the classic one was the driving licence thing, which after we talked to them quietly about it, they said, well, we'll just forget about it, let it drop. Had we tried to back them into a corner, we might have had a different result. So that I'm not a great fan of the idea of getting petitions up and raising hell, because when you look at the Green lobby, we don't really have the strength that they have when it comes to getting public opinion on their side. I must back up what David said in support of Nick on the Steam Apprentice Club. Dorset was fantastic this last time, and I'm pleased to say that it's come to the attention of other people, and the Bath and West show have asked us to do the same thing at their show this year at the beginning of June, because they're having an action on youth, and part of it they thought that would be very attractive to get youngsters, so we're going to have a mini playpen there, along with their parade of vintage tractors and engines anyway. So that will be one that we'll be doing with the Steam Apprentice Club. And I love to watch them, the kids. I think it's fantastic that we can draw them in, and a lot of the ones we get hooked on the job and stay. You know, we've got a lot of people in their 40s and 50s now who were the original steam apprentices, who some of them even making a living with it in one way or another. So yeah. Anyway, to Best. Best, in a sense, has become not irrelevant to the road steam movement, but has become of less interest to the road steam movement, because it's involved, I suppose, more with teaching people who know nothing about their engines, or have to have everything documented and have to have formal training records and so on. I'm talking about the railways, basically. So a lot of the courses that we've developed are riveting, for example, which is a 4-day course, but it does give you what is now a recognised certificate of competence as a riveter, which is of course important for the railways, not just the railways asset, but actually to the structure, because people are actually having to tackle the repair of riveted girder bridges and things like that, for example, and whoever puts the rivets in has got to know what he's doing. We've been fairly quiet, I suppose, in the last 12 months, because with the railways being the principal customer, they've all been busy trying to get themselves up and running again, and they're struggling, a lot of them. You've probably read that the Severn Valley is going to make people redundant. The volumes of passengers have not returned to what they were on any of the railways. Things haven't kept very well. You know, 2 years doing nothing, you fill it up with water and oh hell, the tubes have gone or whatever. So they've all had lots of problems of that sort. But we're quietly getting on with doing various things, and I see my role really in Best now as being just keeping a watching brief to remind them that we're here, and we've got more boilers than the railways, thank you very much, and a lot more owners and a lot more people that know exactly what they're doing with them. Granted, there's a few that don't, but we try and help them as much as we can. So it remains there as a thing, not exactly on the sideline, but the two things that we're doing which are useful are we're in the process of developing a white metalling course. Colin Hatch was very much the leader in that, but he's been busy moving premises, and I'm sure when he's got himself organised that will come back online. Some of you may find that useful. We touched briefly just a short time ago about tubing. Best does run a tubing course. It consists of 2 online training sessions and a 1-day practical course. We held the first of those was held at Collins before he moved premises. In fact, Naomi is not here, but she went on the course to learn how to tube an engine. Again, you come back to the old paperwork trail situation. Fortunately, we're in a position where we're not getting beset with more and more paperwork at the moment. The railways are. There's been a few close shaves on the railways in recent times, as I see it, and the Office of Rail Regulation are taking a much harder interest in what they're doing. And 1 or 2 of the railways, as you probably know, were shut down for periods of time because their paperwork was not in order. And they're having to provide a lot more proof of their competence in all aspects. So we've been working quite a lot, or say we, Best has been working quite a lot with them on that sort of thing, because we have people who are now qualified to judge and qualified to write the relevant documents. So I'm sure we shall see more of that. that is all well out of the league of what we want to do and what we want to learn about, because frankly it's expensive. And it's not the sort of thing that the average traction engine owner wants or needs to do. We're just about to run, next week actually, our first fitness to run training course for railways. This is one of the things that the ORR have picked up on and said, you're going out with that loco, is it fit for purpose? Who's inspected it? Who's checked that the brakes work? Who's done this? Who's done that? So we're starting on that, the fitness to run course. The other one that is actually going on next week as well is boiler washout course. This comes back to what you touched on a little while ago. Water treatment is a big part of that. But it's comparatively easy for a railway because their water supply, by and large, unless you're talking about locos that are wandering around the country, their water supply can be examined and the right regime can be put in place for that particular railway. I think the problem we have is that so many of us have travelled around, and you don't have to go very far. I mean, our end of Shropshire, for example, should have beautiful soft water, but it's as hard as hell because it comes from the other end of the county. And so it's more difficult to tackle water treatment for a road engine. But to say we are doing this boiler washout course, it contains all the sort of things that most of us would take for granted. Don't mix the washout plugs out if you've got screwed plugs. Don't mix the doors. Make sure you know which way up they work best, and so on and so on. But if you're starting with relatively inexperienced people on a railway, that all needs to be put down for them. So as I say, basically I've been in BESS since it began as the road steam representative, if you like, and I sit there like a grumpy old man in the corner and just watch and sort of say, well, if there's anything that I feel impacts on us, then I start banging on the table. If you think there's anything we can do to help you, or any, aspects of it, then do please shout up. And we're also, of course, always looking for volunteers. Gordon has announced, Gordon Newton, who was the driving force behind, has announced that he wants to retire because he's 80 odd, and he's feeling his age. So hopefully we will find somebody to carry on driving it forward, because I think, God forbid that we find ourselves having to follow an increasing paper trail, then that's the time when BESS might become more useful to us in road steam than it currently is. But it's important, I think, that we carry on supporting it and keeping it going for the future. So that's it really for me.
Any questions? Comments?
Anybody standing on their chair, jumping up and down? No? Good. Okay, well, thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Andrew. Right. What have we got next? NTET matters. Right. I've got three things that I want to mention. This year the Trust is going to try and focus a bit more on miniatures and try and bring more of those into the fold, because it's been pointed out by a number of parents that their children are interested in steam and so on, but at the present time there's no way they are going to afford a full-size engine, so that they are looking towards miniatures as the way in to keep their interest in and build their interest, and then come into full size later on. So that's going to be part of our focus as well, the whole of the Trust focus, to try and widen our appeal to everybody. The other couple of things are about subscriptions really. Where, David, you didn't say anything about direct debits. We are changing over to put people on to make subscriptions.
Correct to point that out.
to get people to pay by direct debit. In the past, many of us have paid by standing order. Well, when the subscription goes up, you have to cancel the standing order and resurrect another one, which is time consuming, and a lot of people forget. And we've still got some people who are paying by standing order, which is prior to the last increase in subscriptions, which was done in 2010.
And prior to that.
And prior to that.
Yeah.
So
I'm
it's,
getting magazines.
No, they get one.
No, they're not getting no quarterly magazine.
No. And then if that's not corrected, they don't get any, and we tell them that we're taking, we can't stop them sending their money. In fact, on a rather sad note, we have the estates of people who are deceased still supplying us with standing order money, and we have to say that and we've said this to HMRC and the Charities Commission, up to telling them, and the money still comes, we start to treat it as a donation, and that goes into the donation fund. We just simply can't stop the direct debits.
Should be a lot better fix for pursuing some of these things that Tom's been talking about today and other matters. And finally, can you persuade anybody you know to join? Because, forget the money for a minute, forget that. When we go knocking on the door of government and they say, how many members have you got? That's a problem to us, because we've got a lot of people out there who drive engines who are not members. We are representing them, we're representing them to government, but the government can't see that when we say we've only got so many members. So it is important when we're going to knock on the door about coal, about other things, that everybody who owns an engine is a member. And I know people don't like the trust for a lot of other reasons, and this, that and the other, but we can't support steam on the road in the widest sense unless we are properly representative of everybody. And I can't say it strong enough that it's difficult.
I'm sorry to say this, Bob, but if you introduce the direct debit scheme, I think paying monthly might be more attractive than annually.
That's okay. That's a thing we can think about, yes. You've got to remember that direct debit does costs us, because it has to be processed. But yeah, we'll take that. That's an interesting. Yeah, we'll take that on board. Well, we'll discuss it with the treasurer
And the software developer.
and the support services. Yeah, fair enough. Or we could do it in 4 tranches or something like that. Probably not monthly, but
What was that?
£3.50. Yeah. Right. I mentioned all that. Right. Over to you. Anything else? No? Anything you want to raise that we should be considering? Yeah?
Just one for the rally organiser actually. I think it's this October there's government legislation coming out for the banning of single-use plastics, i.e. United for food trays, food vendors at events will have to be up to speed on that.
That's a pity to rally organiser chaps weren't here, wasn't it? Yeah. I think we'll take that back though, definitely. Yeah. We're meeting, the General Council meets tomorrow, so we can put that across the table tomorrow.
Yeah. This is only one of 2 this weekend, but oh well. Anything else?
Can I ask a question, Bob? I'm going to ask a question of the audience, if you like. Bob, I winced a little bit when Bob said a short while ago now, we're probably not well liked. Why? If that is the case, why? What are we doing wrong? What is it that we're not doing that would get us...
I don't think you're doing anything wrong at all.
Do we want to be liked?
I don't think you're doing anything wrong at all. What you've got to realise is the world has changed now. Years ago, going on the road with your steamroller or your traction engine or whatever you got, way up you say, old bugger, how are you? In the pub at night, I saw you holding the traffic up, it looked great, the engine did, oh, lovely, it's a lovely, bloody food. Nowadays, kids at school, and a lot of people in a 20-year-old area, dirty, smelly thing, bloody thing, all that smoke coming out, all that noise, holding up all the traffic, they don't like it. You're a nuisance. The world has changed, David. Look at this room now. In here, how many people are in here are under 30? Can't finish it.
He said 30, not 300. Hang on.
All getting on that. 2 or 3 chaps at the back here, I know. They're under the age of 40. Right? Many, we're all above it. We're all getting old men. How many people in here bought a steamroller when they were in their 20s, or traction engine in their 20s? We know people who did. And people doing it now, because the world has changed.
Yeah.
But it ain't changed for us in a benefit to be good. We do our very, very best. I think the consultant opinion of a lot of people is rallies, yeah, they're all right. Have a little private do on your own, it's much better fun. Go to Bert's yard and have a steam up and stuff like that when you do your own little private thing. The COVID thing did do a lot. It was a bad thing, it was a good thing, it was all sorts of things. Why we aren't liked, it's not you're not doing anything wrong, you're fighting a real good cause. It's the fact that the world has changed. Big time. And all of us are saying, well, you know, the last old warden rally I had on the old warden side, I was there, and got this thing on there, and this bloke comes up to me and goes, have you got a minute, Alan, please? I need a bit of advice on my role. I said, what are you asking me for? He goes, well, you're one of the old boys. I'm a 60-year-old.
Welcome to the club, Alan.
It's reality.
Yeah.
It's reality.
Yeah, but what I was meaning, Alan, is more than that, is that there are, I don't know, there must be 1,000 engine owners in this country who are not members of the trust.
Why should they be?
Well, where are they going to get the
What
coal?
do you get out of being a member of the National Tractor Trust?
Well,
4 magazines.
Yeah. But all the stuff that David's been Tony's been talking about.
It won't affect any of them until it happens.
I know.
Then they'll know.
Yeah.
Until that, you've got to be a member of the National Tractor Trust to drive your steamroller, because the government has said you can't be a member, you can't drive your steam engine on the road until you're a member of the National Tractor Trust.
We seriously do not want that day.
You don't want that, no, but how are you going to police it? You're not going to. You're not going to.
We don't want it.
No, we don't want it. Of course, we don't want it, no. But what do you get out of being in the National Tractor Trust apart from 4 magazines?
You get a chance to be insulted by somebody like you, Alan.
I'll remember.
The other thing is that I noticed is that the criticism of the club seems to come from people that were members quite a few years ago and didn't like the way things were run many years ago, and they seem to still hold that grudge or whatever or memory. And I've seen it on Traction Tour, people bad-mouthing the trust.
Yeah.
But they're not members, have been for years. Oh, we've joined the bloody National Traction Engine Trust, they're trying to tell us what to do and all the rest of it. I can't understand what's the matter with them.
We have a problem sometimes, given the work that our technical section does and the things that it gets involved with. Some of it, quite frankly, is sub judice. We get involved in law cases because our opinion is asked, and we cannot possibly say anything about what we're dealing with because it would be we'd commit suicide basically. But we're privy to some really stupid carries-ons sometimes. But here we are fighting the cause on behalf of everybody that's running traction engines, and these are things that we can't talk about. We mustn't ever talked about. I'm just
But you
alluding
get
to
those
it.
non-members, when it comes out on the TV, on the news, in the magazines or whatever, you can't drive your steam or traction on the road to your NTE member. And those people who ain't members will go, well, why aren't they bloody doing something about it? That's what you'll get.
But people don't realise that if it wasn't for the work that David and previous chairman
couldn't agree with you
did,
more.
you'd all need an extra licence
Yes.
from the
Couldn't
government
agree with you more.
to
But
drive.
until that comes about, what do you offer?
Well, you can't, some of these things you can't talk about because shouting about them wouldn't be politically good, if you know what I mean.
How many members has the National Traction Engine Trust got?
About 1,800.
And how many traction engine road going vehicle portables, are in existence in this country?
About if you said 3,000, you'd be edging it a little bit, but say 3,000.
And some of them,
You've got to add
some of them members,
You've got to add miniatures to that number, by the way.
but some of them members own more than one.
Oh yes.
Right, so that equates it. So it's less than half of the population of steam members.
Yeah, but
So if you're only counting owners, yes.
But some of those members
So who,
don't own engines at all.
exactly, yeah.
Can I just throw something in the middle of this? It's just something that is of interest to me because I've got two daughters, 20 and 18. They both drive, they both crew, they're both into the engines, and their boyfriends. Both of the boyfriends are into engines as well. I've got my shotgun licence now. But to be fair, and to be fair, one of the boyfriends is rebuilding the ploughing engine. He's making a good head of that and getting on with it. We are seeing quite a lot of younger people involved and interested, particularly we see it in our areas quite a lot, which is really heartening, I have to say. It's really good. One of the things that I ask them, I've asked them as a group, is why aren't you members? I mean, the members of Steam Apprentice Club because Dad bloody paid, you know, but you know, why aren't you, the older ones, why aren't you members of the trust yourselves in your own right? And I've asked them to sort of try and look at what it is that we could give them to attract them in to make them members. So it's not, we're not blinkered to it. I think we've just got to think about it and look at it because it's a different world now. It's a blooming world of Instagram and sorry, I nearly said something rude there, Snapchat and other such things. And it's an instant world. So a magazine isn't relevant to them particularly. And the older members of the SAC, it's no criticism of the SAC, but the magazine that the SAC produces is more aimed at the younger element as I see it. So I think we've got to look at what we're offering them and actually talk to the younger element and see what we can do to get them in. And that's my sort of
You've
thought.
got to be
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Yeah.
Well, it's more that bit of kit now, we kids, isn't it?
Well, all right, you
Yeah.
can sit right and entice the youngsters down,
Yeah.
and your daughter's ages or whatever, to either, or son's ages or whatever you got, to come and play with it. It's all right, Bob, I haven't too long. But you go and play with the steam engine, or can you come and help me clean the ashes out? Can you come and clean me, polish it, or do like that? Or do you want to sit at home talking to all these people you don't know?
I'm just a bit. The girls and boyfriends have asked they want to book it into a local rally under their own right, so get on and do it. So we might turn out, we might come and have a beer with them and so on, but get on with it because they're very capable of it.
Yeah.
And I want them to do that because that encourages them to keep going and get hands on. But I do think I think you're right. I think we've got to look at what we're offering, particularly in the younger element, to get them in. But I do think that I think it's right that people have had maybe bad experiences in the past of what we've done, and that's fixed in the brains, and we need to get away from that. And I think we're seeing a step change within NTET. There's I've got grey hair, but there's less grey hair in the room, and there's other people coming around, and I think hopefully we'll see some benefit.
We've heard it several times said today. Tom said it. You did. Several people. I've been involved in engines since I was 15, I've been involved in engines since I was born, I've been involved in engines, whatever it's saying. How many people coming through now are saying that? The youngsters, they're not. There's a few.
Well, not quite
but they're not coming through, they're not hungry for it, aren't they? They've got so many other things to do, in the world now. Communication's a totally different thing. And it's the environment you've probably been brought up. How did you
It's
get
giving them-
involved?
it's
I
giving
got
them
with
exposure.
my dad. I got involved with my friend down the road had one, so I just liked it or anything. Instead of going playing football or doing something or whatever, or interested in something else, we did that, and you just got this hungry for it, you just carried on. Time passes very slowly. We're not getting it now.
It's been interesting to see, because we've had, when we got our two engines at home, and there's other engines that live with us, and we went through a point, I mean, George will back me up on this bit, here. We went through a point where we were sort of shy of engines because there was a lot in repair and stuff like that, and we were going out and there was a load of us together helping out on one engine because we'd got one engine that was going. We've fixed the buggers now, and we've got to a point, to be fair, where sometimes we struggle for crew. I mean, George would say he was sometimes
every day.
and it's how do we capture them? How do we get them away from this and capture them? And that's one of the key things.
Not in school. I mean, the logo up there, you look at the logo, what's that advertising up there? Smoke coming out the chimney. They're taught in school nowadays.
But it is white smoke.
That's racist. That's racist. You can't say that.
I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I think
no.
we have got quite a lot of young rally coming through. You've got to look around the rally field now. Around our neck of the woods there's an awful lot of young engine owners, which is really, really good. And I think we've just got to bear that in mind and keep an eye on that. And let's hope that bodes well for the future. And we're going to look at what we can do to get them involved with what we do. And
yeah, I think it's the slightly older group that are missing. It's the 30s, 40s that we've not got in. Because I've got two local people that are in their early 40s that will not join the NTET full stop. They're both engine owners.
Why?
Probably because what went on a few years ago.
But it's different now.
Yeah, you try telling them that.
we can only chip away. That's all we can do.
Chip away, yeah. Anyway.
Right, okay. Right, anything else?
Living in England.
No, in that case, thank you for coming. Hmm?
Is that going to the next one?
No idea. Right, that's the end. Thank you for coming. And have a safe journey home. See you on the rally field.
Thank you.